What's up, guys? Welcome to the Fiction Moon. We've got something special today. What if Harry inherited an ancient death god's power and made the Veil of Death his personal gateway? Don't forget to like and subscribe. Let's dive in. Chapter 1. The Veil remembers the Department of Mysteries had a particular kind of silence, not the comfortable silence of libraries or the heavy silence of funerals, but something older and more patient, like the silence of stone that has been waiting underground for 1,000 years. Harry barely noticed it. He was too busy running. His boots hit the floor in ragged rhythm as he sprinted through the circular room, Sirius at his shoulder, the sound of Death Eaters crashing through corridors somewhere behind them. The chamber with the stone archway loomed ahead, and Harry registered it the way he registered everything in a fight, as either obstacle or weapon, nothing in between. What happened next took 4 seconds. He would spend the rest of his life being unable to fully account for all of them. Bellatrix Lestrange came through a side door like something spat out of a nightmare, and the curse she threw at Sirius was lazy, almost contemptuous. Avada Kedavra delivered with a grin, the way someone might swat a fly they considered beneath proper effort. Sirius spun away from it, actually laughing, because he was serious and he had never quite remembered that battles were supposed to feel like terror. The second curse wasn't lazy. It caught him square in the chest, not killing, not that final green flash, but something blunt and deep that stole his momentum in an instant, and Harry watched in the horrible slow-motion clarity of adrenaline as Sirius Black's body passed the boundary of the stone archway and fell backward through the curtain. The tattered black curtain swallowed him without ceremony. Without sound. Without any of the drama that ought to accompany the end of the last family Harry had. Harry heard someone screaming Sirius's name, and it took him a long beat to realize the sound was coming from his own throat. Lupin caught him by the arms. "He's gone, Harry, he's gone, there's nothing," and Harry's brain processed those words the way it processed information in nightmares, in the wrong order, at the wrong speed, arriving too late to mean anything. He could still see the curtain moving. Just barely. The faintest suggestion of disturbance in old black fabric, like something on the other side had just brushed past it. Something on the other side. He tore free of Lupin's grip. He'd done harder things. He'd faced a basilisk at 12 with nothing but a sword he hadn't earned and a bird he hadn't trained. He'd faced Voldemort in a graveyard at 14 with a dead boy's blood still on the grass and his own body still shaking from the cruciatus. He had a very particular relationship with doing the thing everyone was screaming at him not to do. 3 running steps and he was at the archway. "Harry, don't," he went through. The cold hit him first. Not the cold of winter or the cold of fear, but an absolute cold, the kind that exists at the theoretical bottom of the temperature scale, where all molecular motion ceases and the universe sits very still and considers whether to continue. It wrapped around him from every direction simultaneously, and Harry's first thought was this is what space feels like, and his second thought was that he didn't care. Sirius. His voice went nowhere. Sound behaved differently here, it left his mouth and simply ceased, absorbed instantly by whatever surrounded him. He couldn't see anything clearly. Not darkness exactly, more like the visual equivalent of white noise, a featureless expanse of something that wasn't quite light and wasn't quite dark and seemed actively resistant to being categorized. He could feel the archway behind him. Not see it, not hear it, feel it, the way you feel a fire behind you on a cold night, except this warmth wasn't warmth exactly, it was the sensation of life, distinct and vivid against the background of whatever this place was. "Sirius, answer me, please," and then he felt it. Not a sound. Not a movement. Not anything that could be described in language built to describe the human world. The closest Harry could come to it, later, when he tried to explain to Hermione, was that he felt something notice him. The way a sleeping animal notices something enter its cave. Not startled. Not alarmed. Just aware, in a way that was sudden and absolute and complete. The white-gray expanse shifted. Not dramatically. Not with the theatrical flair Harry had come to associate with magic, no lightning, no voices from the heavens, no Latin incantations. It was subtler and infinitely more unsettling. The nothingness around him rearranged itself, the way the pieces of an image rearrange when you finally understand what you're looking at, and Harry found himself standing on something that functioned like ground in a place that felt like perspective. Like being inside a viewpoint rather than inside a location. And he wasn't alone. What stood before him, stood felt like the wrong word, existed felt more accurate, manifested felt closer still, was not a figure in the traditional sense. It had shaped the way shadows have shape, defined by the contrast between itself and its surroundings, not by substance of its own. It was tall. It was still. It radiated the same absolute patience as the silence in the Department of Mysteries, multiplied by orders of magnitude Harry had no mathematical language for. It looked at him. He looked back. He didn't feel afraid. That was the first strange thing. He had been afraid of Voldemort and he had been afraid of basilisks and he had been afraid, in the dark private quarters of his mind, of being ordinary, of all of it having meant nothing. But this vast, patient, indifferent thing, didn't trigger fear. It triggered something else. Recognition, maybe. The way you recognize your own face in a mirror even if you've never consciously studied it. You died, it said, and said was absolutely the wrong word because Harry felt this in his sternum and his spine and somewhere behind his eyes, felt it the way you feel a tuning fork when it's held too close. You died before you were a year old. A killing curse at the doorstep and a mother's blood as payment. You have been, adjacent to my domain, since the beginning. Harry opened his mouth. Your godfather, it continued, without acknowledging that he'd been about to speak, passed through my gate. He is here. I want him back. Harry said it without hesitating, without preamble, without any of the negotiating posture he'd watched adults use when they wanted something from someone with power over them. He just said it, flat and certain, the way you state a fact. He shouldn't be here. He just got out of Azkaban, he was wrongfully imprisoned for 12 years, he barely had a year of actually being free, and he died because of me, because they were trying to get to me, and I'm not leaving here without him. The silence that followed was not the silence of consideration. It was the silence of something very old examining something relatively young with an attention it rarely extended to individual humans. Most who enter here beg, it said. Bargain. Some weep. Some rage. You simply, state. Begging seems like a waste of both our time, Harry said. Either you'll give him back or you won't. But I'd like you to understand that I'll keep asking, whatever the answer is. I'll find a way back here. I'll find the resurrection stone and I'll find the elder wand and I'll find whatever else it takes, because the alternative is returning to a world where the only family I had left just died in front of me at 17, and I won't, he stopped. Not because he'd run out of words but because something had shifted again. The entity, and Harry was still struggling for a better word, had moved. Not physically. Its attention had sharpened, and the sharpening of it felt like a change in atmospheric pressure. You have been marked twice, it said. Once by the killing curse that should have ended you and instead severed a piece of another soul and attached it to your own. Once by your return from the in-between place when you were 16 months old. You carry my signature, boy. You always have. I have been watching you walk through a world that should have claimed you before you could walk. So you've been paying attention, Harry said. Then you know I'm serious. Something happened that Harry had absolutely no framework for. It took him weeks to find a word for it. What the entity did, in that moment, was almost amusement, not the human experience of amusement, not warmth or levity, but the vast cold structural equivalent of it, a recognition of the absurd applied to the infinite scale. You came through my gate, it said. Willingly, consciously, in full possession of your life. That is not done. The living do not walk through the veil with intent. They stumble. They are pushed. They do not choose. I chose, Harry said. Bring him back and I'll leave. Or, the entity said, and the word had a weight to it that made the entire expanse of nowhere shift and settle differently, I could give you both back. Your godfather's life. And something more. What? Harry said, and he was proud, later, that his voice stayed level. Recognition, it said. I have had stewards throughout the long record. Those who understood what I am and served as a point of contact between my domain and the living world. A bridge. The last was a very long time ago by your reckoning. Centuries. The world has forgotten that such a thing is possible. Your ministry catalogues my gate as an artifact. An anomaly. A thing to be studied from a distance. The not quite amusement again, colder and vaster. I am offering you the position. Harry's first instinct was to ask what was in it for him. His second instinct, arriving immediately after, was that a death god offering you a position probably deserved at least 5 seconds of thought before you replied. What does that mean? He asked. In practical terms. What does it actually do to me? You will understand death, it said. Not fear it. Not serve it. Understand it, the way a smith understands fire, as a tool and a truth and a thing that does not harm those who respect it properly. My gate will answer to you. The spaces between life and death will be navigable to you as they are to nothing else that draws breath. And the thing riddle placed inside you, a pause with the quality of something enormous and patient examining something small and parasitic, will be visible. And removable. Harry went completely still. The Horcrux. The piece of Voldemort's soul that had lived inside him since infancy, that Dumbledore knew about and had not told him, that Harry had felt sometimes in nightmares as a wrongness, a not quite belonging that he'd always attributed to being an orphan and never quite having a home. The entity was talking about that. You know about that, Harry said. I know everything that enters my domain, it said. Riddle has been splitting his soul for decades. Each piece screams when it passes near my gate. Did you know that? That is the quality of what lives in you. A fragment of something screaming. Harry thought about that. About Voldemort's fear. About why the man, the thing, was so terrified of death that he'd torn his soul to pieces to avoid it. And about what it would mean to be the one person alive who understood death as a native language rather than a threat. All right, Harry said. Yes. You do not wish to consider further. You're offering me Sirius alive, the piece of Voldemort's soul removed from my head, and an understanding of death that no one else has. The only question was whether there was a catch I was missing. I don't think there is, or at least, not a worse one than what I'm already dealing with. Another long pause. Most who have stood here, the entity said, in the small number of times this conversation has occurred in any form resembling this, have taken much longer to decide. Weeks. Lifetimes. I've been making fast decisions in bad situations since I was 11, Harry said. I've gotten pretty good at it. What came next had no analogy in human experience. Harry would describe it to Hermione later as being taken apart and put back together by something that understood every single piece, and Hermione would write that down in her notebook with her hands slightly shaking. It was not painful. That was the most disorienting part. He'd expected pain, had braced for it, and instead what he felt was a completeness, the way a chord resolves, the way a breath releases. Something left him, the screaming fragment, Voldemort's seventh of a soul, peeling away from the tissue of him like a bandage from healed skin, and something else settled into the space it left, quiet and immense and patient as stone. When Harry could see again, Sirius was standing next to him. His godfather looked different. Not physically, not in any way Harry could point at specifically, but in the way a person looks different when they've been somewhere that changed them down below the visible level. Sirius's eyes were the same gray. His face was the same angular, once handsome wreck that 12 years of Azkaban had weather-beaten into something harder. But there was something behind the eyes that hadn't been there before. A knowledge. A stillness. Harry, Sirius said, and his voice was completely steady, which was wrong because Sirius was never completely steady. Sirius. Harry's voice cracked on both syllables and he didn't try to stop it. You absolute, you laughed, Sirius, you were laughing while she was cursing you. In my defense, Sirius said, it wasn't the killing curse, I thought I was fine, you weren't, I know, I'm aware, I literally just died. Harry grabbed him by the front of his robes and pulled him into a hug with roughly the same energy as a collision, and Sirius wrapped both arms around him and held on with a tightness that communicated volumes about where he'd just been and what he'd just understood. About the alternative. I know, Sirius said, quieter. Into Harry's hair. I know, kid. They stood there for a moment in the nowhere place, in the white-gray expanse of death's own domain, and it didn't feel like grief. It felt like the opposite. Then they went back. The curtain split like water. Harry came through the archway first, Sirius a step behind him, and the Department of Mysteries snapped back around them with the sensory shock of full reality, light, color, temperature, the smell of spell-scorched stone and the distant echo of someone screaming a floor above. The room was in chaos. Lupin had his wand up and was staring at Harry with an expression that suggested his brain had simply stopped functioning. Tonks was frozen mid-step. Moody's magical eye was spinning in its socket like it couldn't decide what to look at. Even the stone archway had gone silent, the whispering that Harry had noticed before, the murmuring voices from behind the curtain, had stopped entirely. The curtain hung perfectly still. Hello, Harry said to the room in general. You, Lupin started. He, Tonks started. Both of them, Moody said, and this was apparently too much even for one of the most experienced aurors in British wizarding history, because he fell into the same silence as everyone else. Bellatrix Lestrange, who had been backing toward the door on the far side of the chamber with an expression Harry had never seen on her face before, uncertainty, genuine and ugly, chose this moment to fire a curse. Crucio shrieked with the kind of absolute conviction she'd used on Neville's parents. Harry held up one hand. The curse hit the air in front of his palm and stopped. Not deflected, not rebounded, stopped, like a film paused at the critical frame, hanging in the air for one suspended heartbeat, and then it came apart. Unraveled. The red light dissolved into nothing, absorbed by something, and the chamber went so quiet that Harry could hear Bellatrix breathing. She was staring at his hand. He looked at it too, faintly surprised. He'd felt the power moving before the thought was fully formed, an instinct, like catching a falling object before the conscious mind has registered it falling. The magic of the veil, or the entity's recognition, or whatever he was now, it had moved on its own, curious and calm and utterly without panic. Harry had the distinct impression that what had just dissolved a Cruciatus curse could do significantly more and wasn't particularly concerned about whether it had to. Bellatrix's certainty, which was usually the most unshakable thing about her, cracked visibly. Her eyes went to the archway and back to Harry and back to the archway, and whatever she understood about the veil, which was apparently enough, finished the crack. She ran. Harry watched her go without moving. He could follow. Could certainly catch her. He was aware, in a way that was new and strange and utterly without ego, that nothing in this building could meaningfully hurt him right now. But she was already gone and the more important things were here, and Harry had never been someone who chased victories he'd already won. What, Lupin said carefully, just happened? Harry turned to face the Order members and found them in various states of incomprehension. Moody, to his credit, had recovered the fastest and was watching Harry with that particular quality of focused attention he usually reserved for things he was trying to decide were threats. Sirius had moved to stand slightly behind Harry's shoulder, not subordinate, not protective in the conventional sense, just present, in a way that communicated clearly that they had come back together and intended to remain that way. Sirius is alive, Harry said. That's the important part. Harry, Lupin said, and he was using the voice he used for dangerous explanations, the measured academic voice, you went through the veil. You both, he stopped. Tried again. That's not, you can't come back from, apparently you can, Harry said. Under specific circumstances. What circumstances? Harry looked at the archway. The curtain was absolutely still. The whispering voices had not returned. Something had changed about the archway itself, a quality, a texture, an almost architectural difference. It felt like a door now, in a way it apparently hadn't felt to anyone before. Like something that could be opened by someone with the right key. Harry was the key. "I'll explain," he said. "Not here. Not now. We should go." "Dumbledore," Lupin started. "Will be told what he needs to be told," Harry said, and the calmness in his own voice surprised him faintly. It wasn't the calmness of suppressed emotion, he'd spent years learning that particular performance. It was something else. A stillness that came from underneath rather than on top of things, structural rather than surface, the kind of calm that didn't require effort to maintain. Lupin heard it too. Harry could see it in his face, the slight recalibration, the look of a man who knew Harry Potter very well trying to process the fact that some essential thing had shifted. "All right," Lupin said, after a pause. "Let's go." They went up through the ministry in a tight group, and the battle above them was already winding down, Death Eaters operating away, several bound by ministry aurors who had finally arrived in sufficient numbers, the atrium showing the fresh scorch marks and overturned furniture of a fight that had burned fast and hot. Harry walked through it without hurrying. Sirius walked beside him. The aurors who looked at them looked twice, then looked at each other, then made the collective decision that whatever was happening here exceeded their immediate jurisdiction and opted to focus on their actual jobs. Smart people, Harry thought. Trust your instincts. The flue in the atrium was back up, someone had restored it, or perhaps it had simply returned once the Death Eaters fled, and they went through in pairs, emerging into the drawing room of Grimmauld Place in a shower of green flame that scattered across the hearth rug and vanished into cold stone. The kitchen was full of people in approximately 4 seconds. Mrs. Weasley materialized from somewhere overhead and descended on them with the energy of a force of nature, grabbing Harry and then Sirius in succession with a fierceness that suggested she'd spent the last hour expecting exactly the opposite outcome and was currently processing the relief of being wrong. Fred and George appeared in the doorway, took one look at the scene, and for once had nothing to say. Ron was behind them, bruised and limping slightly from something. Harry would ask about that later, with a cut above his eyebrow that was bleeding neatly onto his collar. Hermione hit him like a small missile. "You went through the veil," she said, into his shoulder, in the tone of someone who has moved past hysteria into something quieter and more focused. "Harry, you went through the veil." "Yes," Harry said. "You came back." "Yes." "With Sirius." "Yes." She pulled back to look at him and her eyes did the thing they always did when she was conducting a rapid analysis, moving over his face in quick precise passes, cataloging, comparing to expectation, flagging anomalies. He watched her find one. Then two. Then a whole series of them, the way you pull a thread and a whole knot follows. "You're different," she said. Not an accusation. Not quite a question. "Yes," Harry said, for the 4th time. She stared at him for another moment, and he could see her choosing, very deliberately, between demanding an immediate complete explanation and recognizing that there were too many people in the room and he had just been through something she didn't have the vocabulary to categorize yet. The second instinct won. Hermione, for all that she was legendarily incapable of leaving questions alone, had very good instincts about people. About Harry in particular. "Later," she said. "Later," he agreed. He looked across the kitchen at Sirius, who had ended up in a chair by the fire with Mrs. Weasley pressing a cup of tea on him with the zealotry of someone who considers hot drinks to be an appropriate response to all crises. Sirius was accepting it with a particular gentleness, not the slightly performative patience he sometimes deployed when indulging others, but something real, a quality of being present in a moment that most people take entirely for granted. He'd been somewhere else. He'd seen it, whatever it was, the landscape beyond Harry's brief frozen impression of nowhere, the full reality of death's domain. He'd been there and come back, and it had changed something in him, down below what words could reach. Their eyes met across the kitchen. Sirius raised the teacup. Small salute. The gray eyes said several things that neither of them needed to say aloud, and Harry felt, with a clarity that was new and absolute, the difference between having family and being alone. He'd known the difference academically before, in the way you know facts about places you've never been. Now he felt it in the structural sense, the way the entity behind the veil had given him the structural sense of other things, not a fact about the world but a truth inside it. He found Ron at the table and dropped into the chair beside him. "Right," Ron said. He looked at Harry sideways, the way he did when he was trying to calibrate. "So. Bit of a night, then." "Bit of a night," Harry agreed. "You went through the veil." "I did." "And you came back. Brought company." Ron looked at Sirius. Then back at Harry. His expression cycled through several positions and settled on something that was equal parts stunned and fiercely, simply glad. "You absolute," he stopped. Shook his head. "Only you, mate." "I'm serious." "Only you." "Serious," Harry said, because he couldn't help it, and they were both tired and wrung out and the joke was terrible, and Ron laughed anyway, a real laugh, the kind you can't stop when you're running on adrenaline and relief. It helped. It helped the way familiar things always help in the aftermath of something enormous. It scaled the moment back to human size, at least temporarily, made it possible to sit at a kitchen table with tea going cold and a fire burning low and feel like a 17-year-old boy rather than something a death god just put back together and sent into the world with new instructions. Though that was also what he was. He could feel it, quiet and patient beneath everything else. The sense of the veil behind him, not close, not pressing, not urgent, just aware the way the entity had been aware of him. A gate that knew it had a key. Something that would be there when needed and that required nothing of him in the meantime. He sat with that knowledge the way you sit with something heavy that turns out to be lighter than expected. It was manageable. More than manageable. It was, he realized slowly, through the fog of the longest night he'd had in a year that had contained several competitors, what having power without fear actually felt like. He'd had power before, he'd always had power. Dumbledore had been telling him so for years in the careful, deliberate way of someone dispensing information on a careful deliberate schedule. But power held with fear, power exercised in terror, power deployed in reaction, that was a different thing entirely from what sat in him now, settled and certain and waiting without urgency. He was 17 years old and he had walked through the door of death and come back with his godfather and a fundamental rearrangement of everything. He picked up his tea. "What happens now?" Ron asked. Harry thought about Voldemort, who was somewhere out there having a very unpleasant night as pieces of his soul began to destabilize in ways he didn't yet understand. He thought about Dumbledore, who would arrive by morning with carefully arranged explanations and strategic expressions and the long-practiced art of telling Harry exactly as much as Dumbledore had decided Harry needed to know. He thought about the Horcruxes, which he could feel now, not precisely, not yet, but the way you feel weather changing, a pressure at the edge of awareness that would sharpen with time. Places where death had been cheated. Places where the veil's geometry was wrong. He thought about the coming morning and what it would require, and about what he was now, and about the fact that for the first time in his life, the future didn't feel like a threat. Now, Harry said, everything changes. The fire cracked in the grate. Sirius looked up from his tea, caught the words across the kitchen, and nodded once, a small, precise movement from someone who had been to the edge of everything and back and understood, without needing it explained, exactly what those words meant. Harry set down the cup and looked at the fire and waited for morning. Chapter 2, The Weight of What Survives. Dumbledore arrived at 6:30 in the morning. Harry knew he was coming before the wards announced it, felt the approach the way you feel a change in air pressure before a storm, a subtle wrongness in the ambient quiet of Grimmauld Place that resolved itself into footsteps on the front step and a knock that was perfectly calibrated to sound gentle and urgent at the same time. The knock of someone who had been practicing the precise emotional delivery of knocks for a very long time. Harry was already sitting at the kitchen table when Mrs. Weasley let him in. He hadn't slept. He hadn't tried. The others had drifted off in the small hours, Ron falling asleep at the table with his cheek on his arm, Hermione disappearing upstairs with the particular focused energy of someone who intended to read until the thing bothering her became manageable, Fred and George retreating with the quiet tact they occasionally surprised everyone with. Mrs. Weasley had checked on Harry twice and on Sirius 4 times and had eventually settled herself in the armchair by the fire with her knitting and the stubborn posture of a woman who was not going to sleep but was also not going to make a production of it. Sirius hadn't slept either. He was at the other end of the table with a glass of fire whiskey he'd barely touched and the quality of stillness he'd had since they came back through the veil, not Sirius's usual restless performance of relaxation but something genuine and deep, a man sitting inside his own head with whatever he'd seen and taking the time to understand it. They both looked up when Dumbledore came through the kitchen door. The headmaster looked, for the first time in Harry's memory, like someone who had not had time to arrange his face. It was still Dumbledore, the half-moon spectacles, the magnificent beard, the robes that managed to be simultaneously eccentric and authoritative, but behind the eyes was something Harry hadn't seen there before. Not quite alarm. Not quite confusion. Something closer to a man approaching a chessboard and discovering that pieces had moved in the night by their own initiative. "Harry," he said. The warmth in his voice was real enough. That, Harry had always been able to tell. Dumbledore genuinely cared about him. That was one of the things that made the rest of it so complicated. Serious. And the warmth in that was different, layered over something that might have been relief, might have been the particular discomfort of a man who had given up on something and been shown the giving up was wrong. "Morning," Harry said. "Tea's fresh." Dumbledore settled into the chair across from him with the unhurried manner of someone setting their own pace. He folded his hands on the table. He looked at Harry over the spectacles with those unsettling eyes, the ones that always seemed to be processing several layers of conversation simultaneously. "I've been told what happened in the Department of Mysteries," he said. "Or rather, I've been told what was observed. The accounts are inconsistent. Remarkable, in several cases." "I imagine they are," Harry said. "Remus tells me you emerged from the veil." A pause. "With Sirius?" "Yes." "Harry." The voice shifted slightly, not to command, not quite, but to the particular register Dumbledore used when he was asking for something he didn't want to demand. "I think you understand that what you're describing is impossible," Harry offered. "Unprecedented," Dumbledore said, with the faint precision of someone who dislikes imprecise language. "In 1500 years of recorded interaction with the veil, no living person has passed through and returned. The veil is not merely a physical barrier. It is a threshold. A one-way passage to, I know what it is," Harry said. The kitchen went quiet. Not the hostile quiet of confrontation. Harry wasn't approaching this with anger, which was new, which Dumbledore was clearly registering with the same careful attention he gave everything. Just quiet. The quality of a conversation where one participant has more information than the other expected. Dumbledore studied him. "What happened on the other side?" "Something offered me a choice," Harry said. "I said yes." "What sort of choice?" Harry considered how much of this to explain and found, somewhat to his own surprise, that his reluctance wasn't about distrust exactly, or not entirely. It was more that some things lost precision in translation, and he wanted Dumbledore to understand accurately rather than construct an incomplete version and then plan around the incomplete version as if it were the whole. That was a thing Dumbledore did, and it had cost everyone dearly before. "The entity behind the veil," Harry said, "offered me a position. A stewardship. The last person to hold it died centuries ago, and the post has been vacant since. I accepted." Dumbledore did not move. This was itself a kind of movement. Dumbledore was a man of small, constant, communicative gestures, and their sudden absence communicated as loudly as speech. In exchange, Harry continued, Sirius was returned. And something else. He looked at Dumbledore steadily. The Horcrux was removed. The silence this time was different. Heavier. It had a particular texture that Harry recognized, from years of watching Dumbledore navigate conversations, as the texture of a man dealing with something he has been dreading. The slight compression around the eyes. The hands, folded on the table, going very still. "You know about the Horcrux," Dumbledore said. And what was remarkable was not the words but the flatness of them, not a question, barely even a statement, more like a stone being laid down. "I know about all of them," Harry said. "I know there are 7, or were, before last night. I know you've known about this for years. I know you had a plan, a careful, long-range, extremely well-constructed plan, and I know I was a central component of it, and I know the plan involved me dying at the end of it." He paused. "I'd like you to explain why you thought that was something you got to decide without telling me." This, Harry thought, was the difference. 6 months ago, 6 weeks ago, this conversation would have been an argument. Raised voices, the old volcano of rage that Dumbledore's silences always brought to a boil in him, the helpless fury of a boy who understood he was being managed and had no tools against it. Now it was just a conversation. He had questions and he wanted answers, and the wanting was clean, without the desperate edge of someone who needed the answers to feel safe. He didn't need to feel safe. He already was. Dumbledore looked at him for a long time. Long enough that Sirius shifted at the other end of the table with a quiet sound that was not quite clearing his throat but functioned similarly, a subtle reminder that there were 2 people in this kitchen waiting. "You're right," Dumbledore said. Harry hadn't expected that. Not the admission itself, he'd expected it eventually, in some form, under enough pressure. But this quickly, without defense, without the long elaborate construction of context that was Dumbledore's usual method of delivering difficult truths. "You deserved to know," Dumbledore continued. "I told myself that the knowledge would have been a burden too great to bear at a young age. That knowing you carried a piece of Voldemort's soul would have changed you, in ways that would have made what needed to happen more difficult." He paused. "I told myself many things. Some of them were even true. But the most honest answer is that I was afraid of what you would do with the information. You have never been particularly manageable, Harry, even when you had every reason to comply. With that knowledge, you would have been free," Harry said. "Earlier. That's what you were afraid of." Dumbledore's expression did something complicated. "Perhaps," he said. "I'm not angry," Harry said, and this seemed to surprise Dumbledore more than anything else he'd said. "I was. Last night, coming back through the veil, thinking about all of it, I was furious. But the anger was, the entity that I spoke with on the other side has a very particular quality, and some of it came back with me. It makes emotional noise quieter. Not gone. Quieter." He looked at his hands on the table. "I understand why you made the choices you made. I don't agree with them. I need you to make different ones going forward. I need you to treat me as a partner in this rather than a variable." Dumbledore looked at him with the expression of a man seeing something he has been trying to construct for years appear suddenly, whole and fully formed, and being somewhat taken aback by it. "You have changed," he said. "Yes," Harry said, for the second time that morning to someone who'd noticed. "I have." Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. Then, "What do you need from me?" "Information," Harry said. "Everything you know about the Horcruxes. Where they are, what you've already found, what you suspect. The real plan, not the version where I'm told what I need to know to cooperate with the parts that affect me directly." A pause. Then, "And in return?" Harry tilted his head. "What do you want?" "I want to understand what you are now," Dumbledore said, and the frankness of it was startling. No performance, no elegant packaging, just a very old, very powerful wizard acknowledging plainly that something was in the room he didn't have the category for. Not to use it. Not to manage it, as you put it. To understand it. The veil has been in the Department of Mysteries for as long as we have records, and we have never known what it truly is or where it leads. If you have been there, and you carry its authority, Then I know things you've been trying to know for a very long time, Harry said. Yes. I'll tell you what I can. He stood up, and the movement felt natural and easy, nothing of the faint habitual hesitation he'd always had in Dumbledore's presence, the old awareness of being smaller, younger, less. But first I need to sleep. And then I need to talk to Hermione. And then, he looked at Sirius, who had been watching the exchange with the quiet attention of someone listening to music, following the rhythm. I need about 4 hours of uninterrupted time to understand what I can actually do. He was at the kitchen door when Dumbledore said, "Harry." He stopped. Turned. Dumbledore looked at him from across the kitchen with the morning light coming grey and thin through the high window, and what was in his expression was not calculation or strategy or the patient geometry of plans within plans. It was simpler than that. It was the expression of a man who had been carrying something very heavy for a very long time and had just been told he might be allowed to put some of it down. "I am glad," Dumbledore said, "that you came back." Harry held his gaze for a moment. "So am I," he said, and meant it in more directions than one. He went upstairs and slept for 5 hours without dreaming. He woke to Hermione sitting in the chair by the window with a notebook on her knee and a quill in her hand and the expression of someone who has been waiting with professional patience for quite some time. "You could have woken me," Harry said, sitting up. "You needed to sleep," she said. "Also I needed to prepare questions." "How many questions?" She held up the notebook. It was a standard Hogwarts issue, spiral-bound, and it was full. Both sides of the pages, the handwriting getting smaller and more compressed toward the end as she ran out of room and started abbreviating. Harry stared at it. "Hermione. Some of them are multiple choice," she said. "To save time." He laughed, which surprised him, and then laughed more at his own surprise, and Hermione watched him with the precisely calibrated patience of someone who was going to let him have this moment because she understood he needed it but who also had a very full notebook and a time-sensitive agenda. "All right," he said, swinging his legs over the edge of the bed. "Ask." What followed was 2 hours of the most rigorous conversation Harry had ever had, and he had once spent 3 days helping Hermione study for her OWLS. She approached his account of the veil with the same relentless empirical precision she brought to everything, asking for details, cross-referencing his descriptions against what she'd apparently managed to pull from 4 reference books overnight, flagging inconsistencies, pressing him on the points where his language was impressionistic rather than precise. She did not express horror or awe. She expressed, occasionally, a sharp academic excitement that she was clearly trying to keep proportionate to the gravity of the circumstances and only partially succeeding. "The entity communicated without language," she said, reviewing her notes. "But you experienced it as language." "More like, it used whatever format my brain could process," Harry said. "The meaning was there first and the words were the delivery method. Like a translation that happens faster than the original. And the power itself, when you stopped Bellatrix's curse, I didn't think about it," Harry said. "It moved before the thought did. Like a reflex." "But it's not your magic," Hermione said, leaning forward. "Your core magic, your wand magic, is that still intact?" Harry picked up his wand from the nightstand and turned it in his fingers. He felt it, the familiar warmth of it, the particular resonance of holly and phoenix feather, unchanged. "Yes. This is, separate. It's underneath. Or alongside. Not replacing, just, added," Hermione said, writing rapidly. "Added," Harry agreed. "And you can feel the Horcruxes." "Not precisely. Not yet. It's like, you know when you're in a room and you can't see a fire but you can feel the heat, and the heat tells you the direction?" He paused. "The Horcruxes feel wrong in the same directional way. Places where death was cheated. The veil knows when something has interfered with its natural process, and I share that knowledge now, and it feels like pressure. Like a wound that won't close." Hermione stopped writing. She held the quill above the page for a moment, not moving, just thinking in the concentrated total way she had. Then she set the notebook down on her knee and looked at him fully. "Harry," she said. "You understand what this means? For the Horcrux hunt. For all of it." "Yes," he said. "Dumbledore has been trying to locate them for years." "You can feel them." "I can feel them," he confirmed. "There's one at Hogwarts," she said, and this was not a question, she was testing, watching his reaction. He felt it when she said the word, like a compass needle swinging. "Yes. Something old. Something that's been there a long time." He frowned slightly, reaching for the impression. "Not an object specifically, not yet. But the wrong, it's there." Hermione picked up the notebook again. "Ravenclaw's diadem," she said. "I've been theorizing. The lost diadem of Rowena Ravenclaw has been missing for centuries, and if Voldemort was collecting Founder artifacts, then he'd have gone for it," Harry said. "Yes. That fits." They looked at each other with the specific mutual recognition of people who work well together and both know it. "We need to find them all," Harry said. "Before Voldemort realizes what's happening. Right now I can feel that too, faintly, like a note being played at the edge of hearing. He's unsettled. Last night, whatever happened at the Ministry, he felt it. He doesn't know what it was, but he knows something changed in his architecture. He found the word for it, his Horcruxes are his anchors. He can feel when they're disturbed. I disturbed them just by coming back through the veil. They're destabilizing," Hermione said, eyes wide. "Slowly," Harry said. "But yes. He's going to start moving to protect them. We need to move faster." Hermione closed the notebook. Opened it again. Closed it again with the firm precise motion of a decision being made. "I'm with you," she said. "Whatever this is. However strange it gets. I'm with you." "I know," Harry said. "You always have been. Also," she said, and the shift in her tone was subtle and precise, "I have to say this once and then I'll leave it alone. What you did last night, going through the veil, was the single most reckless thing you have ever done, and your history in that area is remarkable. I understand why you did it. I am glad it worked. But Harry, if you ever go through a portal to the actual realm of death without at least telling me first," noted, Harry said. "I mean it." Hermione noted. She looked at him for a moment with the expression that was equal parts exasperation and fierce protectiveness and something she didn't have a name for yet, and then she stood up and said, "Good. Wash your face, you look terrible. We have a lot to do." The rest of the day had the quality of a calm before a storm that everyone in the house was aware of and no one was discussing directly. Mrs. Weasley cooked with the fervor of someone who needed her hands to be occupied. Fred and George, who had come back from the Ministry with minor injuries and a new level of seriousness beneath their usual performance of levity, sat in the drawing room talking quietly in a way that was so unlike their public selves that Ron kept looking over at them with mildly unsettled expressions. Arthur Weasley came through the flu at noon looking exhausted and grey around the edges from whatever was already happening at the Ministry, and the look he gave Harry when he saw him was layered and complicated and ultimately resolved itself into a quiet hand on Harry's shoulder and a nod that said several things without any of them becoming words. Harry found Sirius in the back garden in the afternoon. The garden of Grimmauld Place was not what you'd call beautiful. Years of neglect had reduced it to a walled rectangle of overgrown dark plants that leaned toward each other like conspirators, and the high brick walls cut it off from the street so completely that it felt like a pocket world, sealed and separate. Sirius was sitting on the stone bench by the far wall with a cigarette he wasn't smoking, just holding, letting it burn down to nothing between his fingers while he looked at nothing in particular with the intent focus of someone watching a film only he could see. Harry sat beside him. For a moment neither of them said anything. The cigarette burned. Somewhere over the wall, London went on with its complicated business of being London. "How much do you remember?" Harry asked. Sirius was quiet for a moment. "All of it," he said. "Every second. It doesn't fade, the way dreams do." It's clear. Permanent. He took a drag of the cigarette and this time did it properly, exhaling smoke into the cold afternoon air. It's not what I expected. Though I couldn't have told you what I expected. What is it? Sirius thought about this. Quiet, he said finally. It's quiet in a way nothing here is quiet. There's no noise of being alive. No wanting things, no missing things, no worry. Just, he searched for it, perspective. Everything looks different from there. Not bad. Not painful. Just, very clear. A pause. I understood some things I'd been getting wrong. Like what? Sirius looked at the end of the cigarette. Like that I've been living in grief since I was a boy. James, your mum, Azkaban, all of it stacked up in a particular way, and I was carrying it. I didn't know how to put it down. I'm not sure I tried very hard. He glanced sideways at Harry. You came through that gate for me. Yes, Harry said. Most people wouldn't have, Sirius said. Not out of, they'd have been too afraid. They'd have pulled back. You went through like it was obvious. It was obvious, Harry said. Sirius looked at him properly then. The grey eyes that had always had a slightly fractured quality, 12 years of Azkaban, of watching yourself from a distance, of being imprisoned with nothing but your own worst thoughts, were different. Still grey, still recognizably serious, but with a clarity in them that was new. Like a smudged lens wiped clean. What did it offer you? He asked. Harry told him. All of it, the entity, the recognition, the choice, the feeling of Voldemort's Horcrux leaving him. Sirius listened without interrupting, which was also new, that particular quality of total attention from a man who had always been more comfortable talking than listening. When Harry finished, Sirius was quiet for a long time. Good, he said finally. Good? Harry said. You said yes, Sirius said. You didn't hesitate. You didn't overthink it, didn't look for the catch, didn't shrink from it. You took it. He looked at Harry with the expression of someone conveying something precise. Your father would have done the same. James never ran from something large, and he never pretended power he had wasn't there. It used to drive people mad. The ghost of a grin drove Snape absolutely mental. Harry smiled. It was a real one, unpracticed and complete. There's something else, Sirius said. He stubbed out the cigarette on the stone bench and turned to face Harry more directly. When I was there, in that place, I could see things. Not in a vision sense. More like, I could see the structure of things. The way things connect. He paused. There's something wrong with Dumbledore's hand. Harry stilled. He had noticed, faintly, the previous night, the blackened quality of the fingers on Dumbledore's right hand that Dumbledore had kept angled away from him throughout their kitchen conversation. He had filed it and not addressed it yet. From a Horcrux, Harry said. He's been hunting them. He found one and something went wrong. It's spreading, Sirius said. Whatever curse is on it. From there I could see it, the wrongness of it, the same wrongness you're describing in the Horcruxes but in reverse, a cursed object that's been destroyed but took something with it as payment. His voice was level and certain in the way that came from having been somewhere and seen something clearly. He's dying, Harry. Not quickly. But it's there. Harry absorbed this. I know, he said, and the knowing was the directional pressure again, the veiled sense of things being wrong, the same frequency as the Horcruxes but different in quality. A life being siphoned rather than death being trapped. I could feel it this morning and I didn't say anything because there's a right order to these conversations and that one isn't first. When does it become first? Soon, Harry said. This week. I need to go to him with something, information, strategy, the Horcrux locations, because if I go to him with only I know you're dying and you didn't tell me, the conversation gets emotional, and emotional conversations with Dumbledore run on his terms because he's had decades more practice with them. Harry looked at the darkening brick wall. I go with information and a plan, and I put that on the table, and then we talk about the dying. Sirius stared at him. You're 17 years old, he said. Eventful 17, Harry said. Sirius laughed, and the laugh was real and full, and it broke something open in the garden, scattered the tension that had been sitting in the cold air like smoke, and Harry felt it and breathed out and felt the veil at the edge of everything, patient and still. I need to ask you something, Harry said. About the Order. Ask. How many of them are actually going to be useful when things change? When it's not about surviving long enough for something to happen, but about actively moving against Voldemort with information and intent? Sirius thought about this with the seriousness it deserved. Moody, absolutely. He'll adjust to you being what you are faster than anyone. He's seen too much to be shocked for long. He counted on his fingers. Lupin, yes, but it'll take him time. He'll want to protect you before he accepts that you don't need protecting in the same way. Arthur, steady as anyone you'll find, but he's constrained by the Ministry. The twins, a slight pause, a reassessment. The twins might be more useful than anyone's giving them credit for. They've been underestimated for so long they've started believing it themselves. And Dumbledore? Harry asked. Dumbledore, Sirius said slowly, will be the most useful person in the world if he can stop managing you long enough to work with you. Whether he can do that, he tilted his head. He's not used to not being the most powerful thing in the room. He's not, Harry said simply. Anymore. And he knows it. I could see it this morning, the way he recalibrated. He's intelligent enough to recognize what that means and pragmatic enough, eventually, to accept it. I just need to make sure he understands that it's not a competition. And is it? Harry shook his head. I don't want his position or his authority. I want Voldemort gone and everyone I care about alive at the end of it. Those are my goals. Everything else is just how we get there. Sirius nodded slowly. Then he said, with the practiced casualness of someone whose casual delivery always preceded something real, I'm with you, Harry. For whatever it means. Whatever comes next. I know, Harry said. And I'm done being a liability, Sirius continued, and there was something clean and undefended in how he said it, none of the usual flinch in the direction of the topic, the habit of self-minimizing that Azkaban had installed and he'd never fully removed. Whatever being beyond the veil gave you, it gave me something too. I don't know how to name it yet. But I'm present. Properly. For the first time in a long time. Harry looked at him and saw it, the thing that was different that he hadn't been able to identify fully in the kitchen. Not just the clarity in the eyes. The posture. The completeness of occupying the moment rather than hovering at its edge. Good, Harry said, and meant it with everything. The Ministry's representative arrived at 7 in the evening. Harry felt him before he knocked, a different kind of awareness, not the veil's directional pressure but something adjacent to it, the sense of a purpose approaching. When Mrs. Weasley opened the door with her wand already drawn, the man on the step was not what Harry expected from the Ministry. He was perhaps 50, lean and grey at the temples, with a civil servant's practiced neutrality and sharp eyes that moved over the entrance hall with the thoroughness of someone logging information rather than simply looking at a room. He wore ministry robes that were neither formal enough for an official visit nor casual enough to suggest this was anything other than exactly that. The briefcase he carried was standard issue and unremarkable, which Harry immediately noted as slightly too unremarkable, the kind of ordinary that takes effort. Corvin Mace, the man said, to Mrs. Weasley's drawn wand and her expression of unwelcoming preparedness. Office of Magical Incidents. I'm here to speak with Harry Potter. On what authority? Mrs. Weasley said. The Department of Mysteries, Mace said, and the words had weight in them, has recorded an anomaly in the Veil Chamber and has requested an account from those present. It's a formal inquiry. It's also, and here his careful civil servant neutrality shifted, very slightly, not the kind of inquiry that involves the minister or any of his people. We do not answer to Fudge's office. We answer to the unspeakables. Mrs. Weasley looked at Harry. Harry had come through from the kitchen at the knock and was standing in the hallway with his hands in his pockets and the specific quality of unthreatened attention he'd been finding natural all day. "Let him in," Harry said. The kitchen was just the two of them. Harry had made sure of that, telling Sirius and Hermione to be nearby but out of earshot with the confidence of someone who knew he wouldn't need backup but understood other people like to have options. Mace sat down across from Harry and set the briefcase on the table and didn't open it, which was interesting. "You went through the veil," Mace said. "Seems to be the central fact of this week," Harry said. "The Department of Mysteries has been studying the veil for 500 years, Harry said. "Approximately. With limited results, because studying it from the outside is like studying a book through the cover." "I know." Mace looked at him. His expression was carefully neutral in the way of someone who is genuinely surprised and is managing it professionally. "You know quite a bit about the veil," he said. "I've been to the other side of it," Harry said. "That tends to be educational." A pause. Mace's eyes moved to Harry's hands on the table, then back to his face. "The unspeakables have a theory," he said. "About the veil. About what it actually is, beyond what they've been publicly documenting. It's not a popular theory. It's unprovable from the outside. Which is why," he stopped. "Why you're here," Harry said. "Because now there's someone on the inside." Mace nodded. One precise dip of the head. "What's the theory?" Harry said. "That the veil is not an artifact," Mace said. "Not created. Not installed. That it has always been there, in whatever location it currently occupies, and the Department of Mysteries was built around it. That it is a point of contact. A fixed location where the boundary between life and death is thin enough to be navigable, theoretically, by someone with the appropriate." He paused again. "We didn't have the vocabulary for it. We used the word key. Something or someone the veil would recognize." "And now you think you found one," Harry said. "The veil was silent," Mace said. "For as long as our records exist, the whispering sounds it produced were ambient. Background. Constant. When our people went into the chamber this morning to document last night's incident," he looked at Harry with those sharp, logging eyes. "It was silent. Completely. Like a room after someone has left it." Harry felt the truth of this in the directional way, the veil responding, recognizing the description as accurate. "It knows I'm not there," he said. "It doesn't need to whisper anymore. The whispers were, looking for something. Calling." Mace stared at him. "I'm not your property," Harry said, before Mace could speak. "And I'm not the Department of Mysteries' property, or anyone else's. If you want to understand what the veil is, I'll tell you what I can. But the unspeakables don't get authority over this and they don't get to run tests, and if Fudge's office hears about any of this, that cooperation ends immediately. Are we clear on those terms?" Mace was very still. Then he picked up the briefcase, set it in his lap, and opened it, removing a single sealed envelope that he placed on the table between them. "This is from the senior unspeakable," he said. "It was written last night, after the initial reports came in. Before I came here." Harry picked up the envelope. Broke the seal. Inside was a single card with 3 lines of precise handwriting. "We know what you are. We have been waiting longer than you know. We want nothing from you but the conversation itself." And Harry turned the card over. Blank on the back. He set it down. "Tell N," he said, "that I'll be in touch when I'm ready. And tell them," he thought about how to phrase this in a way that communicated accurately, "that I'm not afraid of them. But I'm also not ignoring them. There's a difference." Mace looked at him for a moment with an expression that had finally dropped most of its professional neutrality and was just a human being encountering something he hadn't expected. Then he nodded, closed the briefcase, and stood. "One more question," he said, at the door. Sirius Black, officially dead, confirmed by multiple witnesses, fell through the veil in the presence of a ministry-level altercation. "He's alive," Harry said. "You saw him in the hull." "The legal status is a bureaucratic problem for a bureaucracy to solve," Harry said pleasantly. "I'm sure the Department of Mysteries can file the appropriate paperwork, given that they've now confirmed I went through the veil and came back, which presumably reclassifies the went through the veil and came back incident as a category of event that can be documented and handled accordingly." Mace looked at him for one more moment. Then, quietly, almost to himself, "You're 17 years old." "That," Harry said, "keeps coming up." Mace left. Harry sat alone in the kitchen for a moment with the card on the table in front of him and the veil quiet at the edge of everything, patient as stone, and thought about the week ahead. About Horcruxes and Dumbledore's hand and Voldemort's destabilizing architecture and an unspeakable who signed their letters with a single initial. He thought about Voldemort, specifically, about the thing he'd felt that morning, the distant discordant note of something vast and frightened beginning to understand that the world had changed without its permission. It was a dangerous thing, a frightened Voldemort. Fear in someone that powerful always resolved into aggression. The question wasn't whether Voldemort would move. He would, and soon, and with everything he had. The question was whether Harry could position himself and the people around him correctly before that happened. He could feel the answer in the shape of the knowledge the veil had given him. Not certainty, the entity had never offered him certainty, had offered him only understanding, and understanding of death is not a guarantee of survival. But advantage. The particular advantage of being able to see the full board. He picked up the card from N, put it in his pocket. Then he went to find Hermione and tell her they were starting the Horcrux hunt first thing in the morning. Chapter 3, Everything the Veil Knows. The graveyard at Little Hangleton looked exactly like the kind of place where something important had been buried and then very deliberately forgotten. Harry stepped through at dawn. Not through the front gate. He'd walked around the perimeter first with his hands in his jacket pockets and the veil's sense of wrongness pulling at him like a compass needle that had found magnetic north and refused to be redirected. The wrongness here was old and layered, the kind that accumulates over decades of deliberate intent, and underneath the general miasma of a graveyard, which was its own texture entirely, different from the veil's domain, more like an echo than a presence. There was something specific and tightly coiled, a knot of cheated death that the veil's awareness in him recognized with the immediacy of touching something hot. A Horcrux. Close. He stepped through the low stone wall and walked. The graves came up around him in the gray early light, riddles, mostly, family name carved in different sizes and states of weathering across a dozen plots. Thomas Riddle. Mary Riddle. A whole genealogy of a family that had no idea what they'd contributed to the world by existing. Harry walked past them without stopping. The pool was ahead and to his left, toward the oldest section of the graveyard where the stones were weathered down to barely readable stumps. He found the tree first. A massive, half-dead yew with roots that had been lifting the ground for centuries, its bark the color of old bone. Underneath one of the largest roots, where the ground had heaved up and then settled back in a way that looked natural but wasn't, Harry crouched down and pressed his palm flat to the earth. The wrongness spiked through his hand like a current. He pulled his wand and worked the area clear, not explosive, not dramatic, just careful and methodical, loosening the packed earth around the root until the tin box underneath became visible. Old, corroded, sealed with a locking charm that had been placed by someone used to expecting their locks to hold. Harry picked it up and felt the thing inside it immediately, felt the screaming the entity had described, the fragment of someone else's soul pressing against the inside of its container with the blind, senseless insistence of something that was not quite alive but refused to be dead. It was deeply unpleasant. Like holding a box containing something in tremendous pain with no consciousness attached to the pain, just the pain itself, a shriek without a voice. He tucked it under his arm and walked back out of the graveyard the way he'd come in. Hermione was waiting at the low stone wall with her notebook and an expression that said she'd been cataloging details about the graveyard while he was gone and had filled several pages. "Hufflepuff's cup," she said, looking at the tin box. No, Harry said. Something older. Something personal. He could feel the specific quality of it now that he was out of the general graveyard noise, the Riddle family ring, he thought, though the box was too small to say for certain. One of the first, probably. Made when Voldemort was still finding his method. The ring. The one Dumbledore found. But Dumbledore's already, she stopped. He said he destroyed it. He destroyed the stone, Harry said. The Horcrux in the ring was transferred before he could, no, wait. He held the box still and felt through the metal with the veil's sense and found what was actually there. A tight coil of anchored soul fragment, intact and screaming. He didn't destroy this one. He found it and he cursed himself on it and then Harry looked up. He didn't destroy it. He hid it. Here. They stared at each other. Why would he hide it instead of destroying it? Hermione said. Because the ring contains the resurrection stone, Harry said, and the knowledge arrived as it often did now, not like remembering, but like being handed something that was already true, the veil's sense of connected facts falling into order. And whatever Dumbledore says about not wanting to use it, I think finding an object that could theoretically raise the dead was more than he could quite bring himself to destroy. Hermione's face did several things in quick succession. That's complicated and human and I'm not going to judge him for it, Harry said, but we're destroying it today. How? She said. Horcruxes require something imbued with the power to unmake them, Harry said. Basilisk venom. Fiend fire. The sword of Gryffindor. He held the box and felt through the layers of it and found, underneath the screaming soul fragment and the lodestone pressure of the resurrection stone, a simpler truth. The veil's power that had settled into him was not just navigational. It was, at its core, an authority over the boundary between life and death. And the Horcrux was a violation of that boundary, a thing forced to exist on the wrong side of it. He didn't need a sword. He set the box on the low stone wall and opened it. The ring was inside, exactly as he'd imagined it, a heavy gold ring with a cracked black stone set in it, the crack from whatever Dumbledore had struck it with. The Horcrux screamed louder with the lid open, the fragment of Voldemort's soul recognizing the quality of what was standing over it, and Harry could feel it recoil in the way that a fire recoils from water. Not sentient recoil. Instinctive. He placed his index finger on the stone. What happened was not dramatic from the outside, Hermione told him so afterward, that she'd been watching and what she'd seen was Harry touching the ring and a sound, not loud, more like the sound of a very taut wire being cut, and then silence. From the inside it was different. The veil's power moved through his hand the way current moves through a conductor, immediate and certain, and it found the soul fragment and did to it what the entity's domain did to everything that passed through it, absorbed it, stripped away the architecture of its forced persistence, returned it to the natural order of things. The screaming stopped. Not with struggle. Not with a battle. With the unceremonious relief of something that has been held in the wrong state for too long and is finally allowed to resolve. The stone in the ring cracked further, a hairline fracture splitting from the existing one, but did not shatter. The resurrection stone held. The Horcrux was gone. Hermione exhaled. That's it. That's it, Harry said. You just, with your hand, the veil's authority over the boundary between life and death, Harry said. A Horcrux is a thing existing in violation of that boundary. It didn't stand much of a chance. He put the ring in his pocket, not the Horcrux portion, just the ring now, just a stone. He'd figure out what to do with the resurrection stone later, with more thought than he currently had bandwidth for. 2 down. 5 to go. Hermione opened her notebook to a page that had a careful list written at the top, each item with space beneath it for notes. She crossed something off and wrote beside it. The locket, she said, looking up. Can you feel it? Harry turned slowly, testing the directional sense. The wrongness of Little Hangleton faded behind him as he oriented. It had been the loudest thing nearby, and with it gone the subtler signals became clearer. He found the locket's signature after a moment, the familiar wrongness of Voldemort's specific brand of soul fracture, and the direction of it surprised him. "London," he said. "Near London, anyway. Something, underground." He frowned. "Somewhere people go past it every day." Hermione went very still. Then she said, with the carefully measured tone of someone connecting dots rapidly, "Grimmauld Place." Harry looked at her. "Sirius told me last year," she said, "that they found a locket in the house when they were cleaning. A heavy gold locket with a serpentine S on it, couldn't be opened. Mundungus Fletcher stole it when Sirius died." Her pen was already moving. "If Mundungus has it, it's probably been sold by now. Knockturn Alley, or someone he sold it to who moved it on, Borgin and Burke's," Harry said, because the direction was sharpening as he focused on it, pulling southeast. "It's in Knockturn Alley. Recently moved there." He stood up from the wall. "We go this morning." "We can't just walk into Knockturn Alley," Hermione said. "I can," Harry said. She looked at him for a moment and had the expression of someone whose first instinct was to produce 3 alternative and safer plans and who was actively overriding that instinct because the alternative and safer plans would take 3 days they didn't have. "All right," she said. "But I'm coming." "Wouldn't have it any other way," Harry said. They told Sirius over breakfast and he said, "I'll come too," in exactly the tone that indicated this was not a question and not a negotiation, and Harry said, "Good," without arguing, because Sirius moving through Knockturn Alley with the quality of changed attention he currently possessed was not a liability, it was considerably the opposite. Ron appeared on the stairs while they were getting their things and said, "Where are we going?" with the uncanny timing he'd always had for impending activity, and Hermione said, "Knockturn Alley," and Ron said, "Right, obviously, give me 2 minutes," and disappeared back upstairs. Hermione looked at Harry. "Should we brief him?" "He'll adapt," Harry said. "He always does." The 4 of them apparat to the entrance of Diagon Alley at 9 in the morning and walked past the bright storefronts with the quality of people who had somewhere specific to be. Knockturn Alley opened to their left between the apothecary and a shop selling second-hand cauldrons, darker and narrower than Diagon, the shops leaning together overhead in the way of buildings that have been gradually encroaching on each other's space for centuries and have reached an uncomfortable compromise. Borgin and Burke's was at the far end. Harry had been here once before, at 12, and the shop had the same quality it had had then, the cultivated darkness of a place that dealt in things that preferred the dark, objects arranged in cases and on hooks and pedestals with a studied negligence that was its own form of display. The smell was old wood and something with a chemical undertone, like preservation fluid. The bell above the door announced them and the man behind the counter, Borgin himself, heavy-set and colorless, with the eyes of someone who has spent his career successfully not knowing things he knew, looked up and clocked them in order, Ron, Hermione, Sirius, and then Harry, and at Harry he stopped. "Mr. Potter," Borgin said. Not with warmth. With the flat professionalism of a man who served whoever came through his door and who had also, clearly, been briefed by someone whose opinion he respected about the current state of things. "I'm looking for a locket," Harry said. He moved to the counter while the others spread out naturally, Sirius examining a cabinet on the near wall with absolute apparent casualness. Gold, heavy, serpentine S, couldn't be opened by normal means. It would have come in recently. A few weeks ago, maybe less. Borgin's face did a careful nothing. "I'm not sure I know what you mean." "That's fine," Harry said. He put both hands flat on the counter and leaned on them slightly, and what came off him in that moment wasn't threat exactly, it was the quality of not being particularly invested in Borgin's answer either way, which was in some ways more effective than threat. "I can feel it from here. It's in this shop, probably in the back room. The chain is silver and the locket is heavier than it looks because there's something inside it that doesn't belong there. You'd have felt it when you handled it, a wrongness, like something pushing back from the inside." Borgin was very still. "That locket is spoken for," he said, carefully. "By a party whose business I don't discuss." "Voldemort," Harry said, just the name, flat and clear in the dim shop, and Borgin flinched visibly, the full body flinch of someone who just heard a word spoken aloud that they spent considerable energy never having to hear. He had someone inquire about it. Or he will. I'm ahead of that inquiry by a few days at most. Harry looked at Borgin evenly. I'm going to take the locket. You can either give it to me now and I'll tell whoever asks that it was gone before I arrived, or I take it anyway and you deal with the aftermath of that conversation on your own. A long pause. Borgin had the expression of a man running options and finding none of them particularly good. The thing in it, he said. It fights. When you handle it. I've had 3 assistants refuse to go near the back room since it came in. I know, Harry said. I'll take that problem off your hands. Borgin went to the back room. Sirius materialized at Harry's shoulder. Smooth, he said quietly. He wanted an exit, Harry said. I gave him one. Borgin returned with the locket in a wooden box, holding it at arm's length with the careful handling of someone who has been thinking about tetanus. He set it on the counter. The locket pulsed even through the wood. Harry could feel it clearly, the same screaming quality as the ring but louder, a Horcrux made later in Voldemort's career when the soul fracturing had become practiced and the intention had become colder and more deliberate. Harry opened the box and picked it up. The locket thrashed. Not physically, it was perfectly still in his hand, but the internal pressure of it was frantic, and Harry felt it fighting the veil's proximity the way a drowning person fights water, the purely instinctive resistance of something being overrun by the very thing it can't survive. He closed his hand around it and let the authority in him do what it had done to the ring. The locket went still. The screaming stopped. The shop went very quiet. Even the ambient pressure of the place, the slight weight of the dark objects around them, seemed to be paying attention. Harry opened the locket. The interior was empty, just a small oval chamber, meant to hold a portrait or a lock of hair, with no sign of the soul fragment that had been anchored inside it. He closed it and held it for a moment, just the locket now, just gold. He set it in the wooden box and closed the lid and turned to Borgin. I was never here, he said. Borgin looked at the box, then at Harry, then at the space where the wrongness had been and was not anymore. Obviously, he said. They left. Ron waited until they were back on Diagon Alley proper, in the grey morning light with people going about their business around them, before he said, okay, so you can just, destroy them. With your hand. Yes, Harry said. The things that killed Dumbledore's, he caught himself, recalibrated. The things that even the sword of Gryffindor struggled with. The sword works, Harry said. This also works. Different mechanism, same result. Ron processed this for a moment. Then, wicked, he said, with the clean honest admiration of someone who has never had a complicated relationship with his friends being powerful. Genuinely wicked. What's next? Harry felt through the directional sense, taking inventory of the map the veil gave him, the pressure points, the knots of wrongness distributed across the British Isles and beyond. Hogwarts, he said. The diadem. School's not out, Hermione said. School, Harry said, is not a barrier. We can't just, Hermione. He looked at her. Can you think of a better time to go to Hogwarts than when Dumbledore and every senior order member are based there? When we have cover, infrastructure, and access to the room of requirement, which is almost certainly where the diadem has been hidden for centuries. She paused. Opened her mouth. Closed it. Fine, she said. But we tell McGonagall. Agreed, Harry said. Sirius said, I was expelled from Hogwarts once. Everyone looked at him. Temporarily, he said. And I was still on the grounds, technically, I was just in the lake. A pause. The point is, I know the side entrances. Sirius, Harry said, if you tell me you've been looking for a reason to use those entrances since you were 15, 16, Sirius said, with a grin that was 30 years younger than the rest of his face. I was 15 when I found them. McGonagall met them at the side door off the charms corridor with the expression she reserved for situations that were beyond her preferred parameters but which she was going to handle with professional composure regardless. She looked at Harry, then at Sirius with the barely controlled complex emotion of a woman who had taught both Sirius and James Potter and had spent 12 years believing one of them had betrayed the other, and then back at Harry. "You'll explain all of this," she said. "Not a question." "Fully," Harry said. "Tonight. But first, the room of requirement," she said. Because McGonagall was McGonagall and she had been in this school for 30 years and had long since worked out that certain things existed that Dumbledore hadn't told her about, and had developed a policy of knowing about them anyway. "You think Voldemort hid something there?" "I know he did," Harry said. "Probably centuries ago, when he came here looking for the defense against the dark arts position." McGonagall breathed through her nose in the way she did when she was managing her reaction to information she wished she'd had sooner. "Go," she said. "Come to my office when you're done." And, she looked at Sirius again, and the complex emotion resolved itself, briefly, into something simpler and real. "It is very good to see you alive, Sirius." Sirius looked at her with the expression of someone who is genuinely and simply glad to exist in a moment. "You too, Minnie," he said. McGonagall made a sound that was absolutely not what it sounded like and turned on her heel and walked away. The room of requirement was on the 7th floor and the corridor outside it was empty at this hour. It was mid-morning, students in class, the school going about its ordinary extraordinary business. Harry paced the corridor thinking clearly about what he needed: the Horcrux, the diadem, the hiding place, and the room opened the third time past with the heavy wooden door appearing in the wall and the cool rush of stale air coming from inside. The room of hidden things was extraordinary and overwhelming in equal measure. Harry had never seen it, the DA meetings had been a different configuration entirely, and the size of it hit him first, an enormous space packed to the high ceiling with the accumulated hidden possessions of Hogwarts students across centuries. Towers of discarded objects, broken furniture, trunks with things that moved inside them, cages, mirrors, a full suit of armor holding a viola for reasons no one would ever know. The smell was dust and old wood and something faintly chemical. Hermione let out a long breath. "It could be anywhere in here," she said. "No," Harry said. He stood at the door and let the veil's sense move outward, feeling through the clutter and the dust and the vast accumulated human history of the room. The diadem's signature was faint, not screaming like the ring, not thrashing like the locket, but present, a specific and unpleasant pressure somewhere in the middle distance. "Left," he said. "Hi." They went left, climbing over and around the centuries of hidden things, and found it 20 minutes later balanced on top of a broken wardrobe at the junction of two tower stacks, a diadem, tarnished and blue-gemmed, sitting with the patient stillness of something that had been in the same place for so long it had begun to believe this was permanent. Harry picked it up. The Horcrux inside it was different from the others. Where the ring had been simple and the locket frantic, this one was layered. Something had happened to it over the centuries, the proximity of the room and its constant cycling through configurations having done something subtle to the soul fragment inside it. It wasn't screaming. It was thinking, or approximating thought, a simulacrum of the intent that had made it still running after decades in a dark room with no target. It felt Voldemort's fear in Harry's hands. Felt the disturbance that had been radiating from the veil's new configuration. And it recognized it. Harry closed his hand around the diadem and let the authority through. This one took slightly longer. 3 or 4 seconds instead of 1. The soul fragment didn't go quietly the way the ring had, it fought in the methodical, patient way of something that had been practicing its existence for a long time and had developed conviction. Harry let it fight. The veil's power was entirely unimpressed by conviction, being rather older and rather more fundamental than any fragment of anyone's soul, and after 4 seconds of sustained resistance the diadem went still with the same wire-cutting sound, the same sudden absence. Harry set it down on the wardrobe and stepped back. 3, Hermione said quietly. 3, Harry confirmed. Horcruxes, Ron said, counting on his fingers. Ring, locket, diadem. There's also, Hufflepuff's cup, the snake, the diary, but you destroyed the diary in second year, so, the diary was the first, Harry said. That was already done. Cup, snake, one more. He paused, feeling through the directional sense for the remaining signatures. The cup was distant, east and hidden, something underground or deeply secured. The snake was close to Voldemort himself, which was its own kind of problem. And the sixth was moving, which meant it was being carried, which meant someone knew to move it. He's protecting them, Harry said. Already? Hermione said sharply. Not all of them. He doesn't know which ones are gone yet. But the cup, Harry frowned, following the directional sense. Something's been placed on it. New wards. He put someone on it recently. He looked up. Gringotts. Hermione made a short sound. Of course. The Lestrange Vault. Which is one of the most heavily warded locations in Britain, Ron said. Yes, Harry said. So we're going to break into Gringotts, Ron said. He said it the way he said most things about Harry's plans, with a sort of resigned affection for the man himself combined with complete awareness that the plan was objectively mad. Obviously we are. Of course we are. Not immediately, Harry said. We need more information on the vault layout, the security levels. We need a reason to be there. He turned the diadem over in his hands, just the diadem now, just old tarnished metal, beautiful actually, with the engraving on the band still crisp despite the centuries. Wit beyond measure is man's greatest treasure. We have time. Voldemort doesn't know yet what he's lost. He suspects something, but he doesn't know. How long before he knows? Hermione asked. Days, Harry said. Maybe less if something triggers his connection to the remaining ones. He thought about the snake, the final Horcrux, and the problem it represented. It wasn't sitting in a vault or buried in a graveyard, it was alive and traveling and in the direct company of the most dangerous dark wizard alive. He shelved it for now. One problem at a time. Dumbledore's office was warm despite the November chill, the fire doing its best against the drafty stone of the tower, the portraits of previous headmasters maintaining their usual performance of sleep with varying degrees of commitment. Dumbledore was behind his desk, and Fawkes was on his perch, and the magical instruments on the side tables were turning and clicking in their usual way, and all of it was familiar and should have felt the same as it always had and didn't, because Harry had been to the other side of the veil and come back, and the comfortable pageantry of Dumbledore's office no longer had quite the same power to set the terms of a conversation. He told Dumbledore about the ring, the locket, the diadem. Dumbledore listened with both hands on the desk and the particular stillness that he had, the quality of total and focused attention. The right hand, Harry noted, blackened to the third knuckle, kept slightly angled from full view, the skin of it with the matte quality of something that has been damaged below the cellular level. When Harry finished, Dumbledore said, 3 a.m. The veil makes them findable, Harry said. And destroyable. Both problems solved simultaneously. A pause. You found the ring at Little Hangleton, Dumbledore said, and the weight of it was clear, the ring he'd hidden, the ring he hadn't been able to destroy himself, the ring with the stone. I kept the resurrection stone, Harry said. I haven't decided what to do with it yet. The Horcrux is gone. Dumbledore looked at his hands. Both of them, for a moment. The stone belongs to your family, in a sense, he said. It was the Peverills who created it, and the Potters who, I know the history, Harry said. Sirius told me about the Deathly Hallows this morning, and Hermione confirmed most of it by noon. He waited a beat. I also know about your hand. The fire cracked. Fawkes made a soft sound on his perch. How long? Harry asked. Dumbledore looked at him with those layered eyes. 6 months, he said. Perhaps 8. The curse from the ring, it was designed to spread. Not immediately, but inevitably. I believe I managed to contain it to my hand and arm, but the curse is, it has its own momentum. It will continue regardless of what I do. He said it with the equanimity of a very old man who has had time to adjust to the information, and Harry thought about what Sirius had said in the garden. I could see the structure of things, and recognize the truth of it, the wrongness in Dumbledore that was audible now that the louder Horcrux signals were clearing. There might be something I can do, Harry said. Dumbledore's expression shifted, not with hope exactly, but with the particular quality of a man who is not going to allow himself hope and is therefore managing the possibility of it very carefully. Harry, I don't know yet, Harry said. The entity's power is fundamentally about the boundary between life and death. The curse on your hand is pushing you across that boundary faster than natural. Whether I can push back, he paused, honest. I don't know. But I'm going to try. Not today, I need to understand my capabilities better first. But soon. Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. What was in his expression was something Harry had not seen there before, not calculation, not the patient maneuvering of a man who always had a longer plan in operation. Something simpler. Gratitude, maybe. The expression of someone being offered something they hadn't asked for and hadn't expected. I owe you an apology, Dumbledore said. Several, probably. The Horcrux in you, the plan I had that centered on your death, I told myself it was necessary, that the greater good required, and I believed it. I still believe the logic was sound. But the manner of it. The way I kept you, he stopped. Found the word with the precision of a man who was done hiding behind imprecise language. Small. I kept you small and close and controllable because a Harry Potter who knew the full truth was a Harry Potter I couldn't predict. A pause. I was wrong to do that. Yes, Harry said. You were. No mitigating it, no gracious acceptance that made it easier to hear. Just the clean confirmation of a fact between adults, which Dumbledore had finally started treating him as. We go for the cup next, Harry said. Gringotts. I need everything you know about the Lestrange Vault, its security protocols, what Bellatrix's clearance levels are, whether there are internal wards we can't plan around. Dumbledore reached for a drawer. Inside was a folder of parchment, dense with notes, and Harry recognized it as the product of years of careful and systematic intelligence gathering. I had begun a dossier, Dumbledore said, on the vault. For a potential future operation. He slid it across the desk. I believe you'll find it useful. Harry took it. Opened the first page. Hermione was going to need to see this tonight. One more thing, Harry said, closing the folder. Corvin Mace, from the Office of Magical Incidents. He came to Grimmauld Place last night on behalf of the Unspeakables. Someone who signs as N. Dumbledore's expression moved through something subtle. Nadia Arden, he said. She's been the senior Unspeakable for 40 years. She is not someone to be taken lightly. Is she on Voldemort's side? No, Dumbledore said, with certainty. She is on no one's side. She is a scholar of the fundamental. She would have found you, what you are, to be the most interesting thing in her lifetime. A slight pause. Possibly in several lifetimes. I'll meet with her eventually, Harry said. On my terms and timeline. Dumbledore nodded. He looked at Harry across the desk with the expression of a man who has spent decades as the most powerful and informed person in any room he entered and who was currently experiencing, with a very specific quality, the sensation of no longer being either. Harry stood. Thank you for the dossier. Harry, Dumbledore said, as he reached the door, in a tone very different from any of the tones Dumbledore usually deployed at his retreating back. Not strategic. Not orchestrated. Just, human. Take care of yourself. Not for any plan or purpose. Just, as yourself. Harry paused at the door. I plan to, he said. That evening in the drawing room of Grimmauld Place, with the Gringotts dossier spread across 3 tables and Hermione's notes covering the remaining space and Ron building something architectural out of stacked parchment while nominally helping, Harry felt the distant discordant note of Voldemort change quality. He'd been feeling it all day, the faint signal of something enormous and frightened, a presence at the edge of awareness like a weather system over the horizon. But now the quality of it changed. Sharpened. Went from unease to something more directed. Voldemort was looking for what he'd lost. The wrongness signatures of the destroyed Horcruxes had apparently reached his awareness now that the day was over and he'd had time to check his anchors, and Harry could feel the recognition ricocheting through the distant signal, the ring, the locket, the diadem, 3 of his 7 foundations gone and no warning, no battle, no trace of how. The fear in Voldemort, at a distance, was a remarkable and educational thing. It wasn't the fear of a man who expects to lose. It was the terror of a man whose survival architecture was being silently demolished and who couldn't see by whom or how. Hermione looked up from the dossier and caught his expression. "He knows," she said. "He knows," Harry confirmed. "How long before he moves?" Harry thought about the vast frightened signal in the distance and about fear resolved into aggression and about a man who had been cheating death for 20 years now finding himself in the company of someone who owned it. "Sooner than we'd like," he said. "But later than he wants to. He needs to understand what he's dealing with first." He looked at the dossier spread across the tables, at Hermione's notes, at Ron's structural parchment architecture which had somehow become fairly impressive. "Which means we have exactly as long as it takes him to figure that out." "Then we'd better move fast," Ron said, without looking up from his construction. "Yes," Harry said. "We had." The fire burned low in the grate. Outside, London hummed in the dark. The Vale sat patient and present at the edge of everything, and Harry sat in the drawing room with his family, planning the raid on a dragon-guarded vault while a Dark Lord tried to understand why his death-defying architecture was falling apart, and felt, underneath all of it, the same clean untroubled certainty he'd felt since he'd walked back through that curtain. He knew exactly what came next. Chapter 4, The Architecture of Fear. Voldemort moved on a Thursday. Harry knew it was coming the way you know a storm is coming when the birds go quiet, not through any single observable fact but through the accumulated absence of several normal things. The wards at Grimmauld Place had been rattling since Tuesday, not breached but tested, a systematic pressure applied and withdrawn at intervals that suggested someone mapping a perimeter rather than planning an immediate assault. The Vale's awareness in Harry had been sharpening all week, the distant discordant signal of Voldemort's fear resolving from weather system vagueness into something with specific direction and intent. And on Wednesday night, 3 Death Eaters disappeared from the patterns Harry had been tracking. Not died, he'd have felt that, the signature of deaths registering the way they registered now, as small pressures resolved in the Vale's ambient awareness. Just gone. Removed from the game board deliberately, redeployed somewhere specific. The 3 who vanished were not Bellatrix, who was the most dangerous, or Lucius Malfoy, who was the most politically useful. They were Dolohov, Yaxley, and a third whose name Harry hadn't encountered before, a woman who had been operating under a false identity somewhere in the Scottish borders. The Unspeakables had a file on her. Mace had sent it through a coded channel that Hermione had spent 2 entertaining hours decoding out of pure principle, even after Harry pointed out they could just ask Mace to explain it. These 3 were not Voldemort's blunt instruments. They were his readers, the Death Eaters he sent when he wanted information before he sent destruction. Harry told Sirius, who told the Order, and by Thursday morning Grimmauld Place had quietly shifted from occupied safe house to operational position. Moody arrived at 7 with 2 Aurors he trusted and the energized professional quality of a man who had spent too long waiting for a fight to take a shape he could plan against. Lupin came with him. McGonagall sent a Patronus from Hogwarts confirming that the school's wards had been checked and rechecked and that she had 3 Order members positioned at each entry point. Dumbledore did not come. Harry had asked him not to. This had been a conversation worth having. He'd gone to Hogwarts the previous evening and laid it out plainly, Dumbledore's presence at Grimmauld Place turned a tactical position into a target. Voldemort would bring everything he had if he thought Dumbledore was there. Without Dumbledore, what he'd send was exactly what Harry wanted, the readers, the information gatherers, the 3 Death Eaters deployed to understand what had destroyed 3 of his Horcruxes. "You want them to find you," Dumbledore had said. I want them to report back accurately, Harry had said. There's a difference. Dumbledore had agreed, which still surprised Harry slightly when he thought about it, the ease of it, the headmaster sitting back in his chair and saying very well with the quality of a man who was still adjusting to not being the one who made this category of decision but who was doing the adjusting with genuine effort. Thursday morning. Harry was in the kitchen when the wards announced 3 simultaneous contacts on the south side of Grimmauld Place. He set down his tea. Moody was already at the door to the hall, magical eye whirring. 3 of them, he said. South wall, staggered positions. They're not coming in, they're watching. Let them watch, Harry said. Moody looked at him. Potter, for 5 minutes, Harry said. Let them see what's here. What was here, as of 5 minutes ago? Harry Potter sitting at a kitchen table in a house that was very clearly occupied, with a cup of tea and no visible anxiety, in the company of a man who had officially died 3 weeks ago and was now drinking coffee and reading a Muggle newspaper with the unbothered posture of someone on holiday. Sirius looked up from the newspaper. They're watching. 3 of them, south wall, Harry said. Sirius turned a page. Should I look more threatening? You look fine, Harry said. You look like someone who came back from the dead and has no concerns about being observed. That's exactly right. The 5 minutes passed. Moody kept his eye on the wall and provided a running account in the clipped shorthand of professional surveillance. They hadn't moved, they were using a monitoring charm, one of them had just sent a Patronus presumably back to Voldemort, and then all 3 were gone simultaneously, disapparated from the same positions they'd been watching from. That's it. Ron said, from the doorway where he'd appeared at some point during the 5 minutes with a piece of toast and an expression of someone who'd been expecting more immediate drama. That's the first part, Harry said. He felt through the veil's awareness toward the distant signal of Voldemort, felt the information arrive, felt the fear spike and then resolve into something colder and more focused, the specific kind of focus that precedes a decision. He knows now. He knows I'm here and I'm not hiding and Sirius is alive. He put down the tea. He'll send something heavier this afternoon. How heavy? Moody asked. Bellatrix, Harry said. And not just her. He'll send enough to be certain, because he's moving from information gathering to clarification. He wants to know if I can actually do what the evidence suggests or if there's an explanation he's missing. So he's testing you, Hermione said, from the table where she'd been working on the Gringotts dossier throughout this entire exchange with the focus of someone who had decided that the tactical conversation was covered by the people covering it and her energy was better spent on the next problem. He's testing me, Harry confirmed. And I'm going to let him. Moody made the sound he made when he thought a plan was either very smart or very stupid and hadn't decided which. You know what you're doing, Potter. Harry looked at him. Moody's magical eye was still, for once, fixed on him without the usual restless assessment. Just watching. The real eye alongside it, the eye that had seen more violence than most people understood was possible. Yes, Harry said simply. Moody held his gaze for a moment. Then nodded, sharp and decisive, the nod of a man who had been assessing people in high-stakes situations for 40 years and had made a determination. Right, he said. Tell me what you need from us. By noon the street outside Grimmauld Place had the quality of a held breath. Nothing visible, that was the thing about magical surveillance, it left no physical trace, but Harry could feel the watching the way you feel eyes on the back of your neck in a crowd. Multiple positions now, not 3. 8, maybe 9, arranged in a pattern that suggested a professional who understood perimeter coverage. Hermione had identified the pattern from Harry's description and gone slightly pale. That's a tactical encirclement formation, she said. That's not watching. That's preparation for simultaneous entry from multiple points. Yes, Harry said. Harry, I know, he said. Tell everyone to be ready but not to engage unless I say. Whatever comes through that door, I want them to see me handle it. Hermione looked at him with the expression she'd been using more frequently lately, the one that had started as barely concealed terror at what he was proposing and had gradually, over 3 weeks of watching him be exactly what he said he was, become something closer to fierce trust underpinned by a very small residual terror that she kept mostly professional. "All right," she said. They came at 2 in the afternoon. Not through the door, the wards were too strong for direct entry, 3 generations of Black family security compounded by every reinforcement the order had added over a year of occupation. They came through the Fidelius charm's one structural vulnerability, which was that it only protected the location from being found, not from being entered once found, and which they'd apparently known about from someone who'd once been inside. The drawing room windows blew in simultaneously. Bellatrix came through the front window in a cascade of shattered glass and was firing before her feet touched the floor, 3 curses in rapid succession aimed at the 3 order members positioned in the hall. The other 2 entry points, the kitchen window and the side door, produced 2 Death Eaters each, moving with the practiced efficiency of people who had planned this very carefully. Harry was at the bottom of the stairs. He watched Bellatrix fire and registered the curses the way he'd been registering magic for 3 weeks, not just as colored light and force but as intent, as structure, as things that had a quality and a direction and a relationship to the fabric of what he now carried in him. The first curse hit a shield charm that Moody threw up from the kitchen doorway. The second curse hit the wall. The third curse, Harry stepped forward and caught it. Not with his hand this time. With presence, a quality of simply being in the path of the curse and having the authority to determine what it did when it arrived. The curse met him and stopped and came apart the way the Cruciatus had in the Department of Mysteries, red light dissolving into the general air, and Bellatrix Lestrange stood in the wreckage of the drawing room window with her wand raised and her face doing something Harry had never seen it do. Processing. She was brilliant, in the way that completely unconstrained people sometimes are, no internal resistance to the full application of her intelligence, every faculty pointed outward like weapons. She was fast, creative, absolutely without mercy, and she had spent 30 years being the most dangerous person in most rooms. Harry watched her assess what had just happened and find no satisfying explanation for it, and watched her decide to attack again because Bellatrix Lestrange's answer to things she couldn't explain was always more force. She threw everything she had. Not one curse, a sustained sequence, 7 or 8 in the space of 3 seconds, a combination that was simultaneously a test and an assault, different types cycling rapidly to find something that would work. Harry moved through them. Not dodging, he'd have told Hermione later, trying to explain, that it wasn't like ducking under things. It was more like the magic couldn't quite get purchase on him, like trying to cut water. The Veil's authority wasn't a shield. It was a fundamental disagreement with the premise that these things should harm him. The other Death Eaters in the house had stopped. Bellatrix's partners, 2 on each entry point, had been engaged by the Order members and Sirius, and the fights were still going, but Harry was aware of the way attention had split in the room, the way everyone present was registering what was happening between him and Bellatrix and adjusting their understanding of the situation in real time. Moody, from the kitchen doorway, had lowered his wand. Not because the fight was over but because he was watching with the specific quality of a professional who has stopped working and started studying. Bellatrix was breathing hard. Not from exertion. From something closer to the sensation of running into a wall you were certain wasn't there. "What are you?" she said. It wasn't fear in her voice. Or not primarily. There was a quality underneath it that Harry recognized, the quality of someone whose entire worldview has just been challenged by observable fact. Bellatrix had built her life around a hierarchy of power with Voldemort at the absolute top, and she was currently looking at Harry Potter standing in a ruined drawing room with 7 of her best curses dissolved around him like morning fog, and the hierarchy was not accommodating this information easily. "You know what I am," Harry said. "You're nothing," she said, and the venom in it was real but there was a quality of trying underneath it, saying the thing to make it true. "A half-blood child who got lucky, Bellatrix," Harry said. She stopped. Not because he'd commanded it. Because something in his voice had a quality that her body recognized before her mind could dismiss it, the same quality that existed in very deep water or in rooms where the structural gravity has changed. The same quality that the entity behind the veil carried, in small measure, translated through him. "Tell him what you saw," Harry said. "When you go back. Tell him exactly what happened here." Her wand hand was trembling. She would have died before admitting it, and Harry wasn't going to make her. There was no satisfaction in breaking Bellatrix Lestrange's pride. That wasn't the point of this at all. The point was the message she carried. "Tell him I'm not hiding," Harry said. "Tell him I know what he's lost and I know what he's trying to protect, and tell him," he paused, choosing the words with care, "that the veil sends its regards. Bellatrix Operat." The two Death Eaters from the kitchen window followed immediately after, leaving Moody with the untidy aftermath of a fight that had just resolved in his favor. The two from the side door took a moment longer. One of them had been trading curses with Sirius and seemed reluctant to acknowledge that the engagement had been lost, before they too were gone. Silence settled on the drawing room, complicated by broken glass and scorched plaster and the smell of a dozen different curses discharged in an enclosed space. Ron emerged from behind an overturned settee. He'd been stationed there, theoretically as backup, though the way he stood up with his wand still raised suggested he hadn't needed to cast anything and was slightly conflicted about that. "Is that it?" he said. "For today," Harry said. "They'll come back," Moody said, from the doorway, with the tone of a man reviewing a military engagement rather than expressing concern. "With more. He'll send everything next time." "I know," Harry said. "And you're prepared for that." "More than prepared," Harry said. He looked around the drawing room, cataloguing the damage with the detached precision of someone already thinking 3 steps ahead. "But there won't be a next time here. We're not staying." Everyone looked at him. "We've been in one location for too long," Harry said. "This house was a secret 6 months ago. It's a known quantity now. We need to move the base of operations, and we need to do it before Voldemort sends something that can take apart Fidelius' charms." He looked at Moody. "How quickly can you arrange something?" Moody's magical eye was spinning. "Give me 12 hours, he said. "You have 8, Harry said. Moody looked at him for a moment. "Then, 8, he agreed, and was already pulling out his communication mirror before he'd finished the word. The move was not as chaotic as it might have been, owing largely to Hermione having prepared contingency packing charms 3 weeks ago on the grounds that any situation this volatile probably involved relocation eventually. They were out of Grimmauld Place by 6, leaving it warded but empty. Moody's Auror contacts had prepared a property in Wiltshire, a farmhouse with 4 layers of modern magical security and a Fidelius held by someone none of Voldemort's people knew. The farmhouse was smaller and less dramatically gothic than Grimmauld Place, which Harry considered an improvement in most ways. The kitchen was functional, the drawing room had windows that looked out over actual countryside rather than a London street, and Sirius seemed to feel the weight of the Black family home lift from his shoulders the moment they arrived, his posture adjusting with the unconscious ease of someone who hadn't realized how much they'd been carrying until they set it down. Harry sat at the kitchen table at 7 in the evening and thought about Gringotts. The dossier Dumbledore had given him was comprehensive but incomplete in the specific way that all intelligence gathered from outside a target is incomplete. It described the vault's external characteristics, the security protocols publicly known, the theoretical capabilities of the dragons in the lower levels, but it couldn't account for the internal arrangement of the vault itself or the precise location of the cup within it. For that, you needed either someone who'd been inside it or something the veil could tell him. He put his hands on the table and turned his attention to the directional sense. Hufflepuff's cup was east of his current position. Wiltshire to London, approximately that bearing, underground, definitely underground, the signature had the quality of depth, something below street level. Gringotts was built down rather than across, the vaults descending in a spiral beneath the city, the deepest and most secure at the bottom. The Lestrange vault was not the deepest. Bellatrix would have wanted access, which meant a compromise between security and convenience, probably mid-level. 3rd tier, maybe. He could feel the cup's specific signature clearly enough that he thought, with effort and practice, he might be able to narrow the location considerably. Not tonight. He needed to sleep and he needed to spend time tomorrow working on the directional sense with more focus, mapping the cup's position against what Hermione had pulled from the Gringotts layout documents she'd somehow obtained from the magical building's registry. He was thinking about how to tell her this when Sirius came into the kitchen and sat across from him and said, without preamble, "We need to talk about the snake." Harry looked up. "The last Horcrux," Sirius said. "Besides the cup. The snake's alive, it travels with him, it's never going to be in a fixed location we can plan against." He paused. "The snake is the hardest one." "I know," Harry said. "So what's the plan for it?" Harry was quiet for a moment. "The snake is Voldemort's last anchor," he said. "The cup is second to last. When the cup is gone, the snake is all that's left, and Voldemort will know it. He'll feel the cup go the way he felt the others, and he'll know the snake is next, and he'll do something he hasn't done yet." He looked at the table. "He'll keep the snake with him constantly. Never let it out of contact. Which means getting to the snake means getting to Voldemort." "Which you're planning to do anyway," Sirius said. "Which I'm planning to do anyway," Harry confirmed. "The final confrontation is the snake problem. They happen at the same time." Sirius digested this. "And Gringotts is the step before that." "Gringotts, then Voldemort," Harry said. "Yes. Timeline. As fast as we can move without moving sloppy," Harry said. "Voldemort is going to escalate. After today, after what Bellatrix saw and reported, he's not going to sit still. He's going to do something large and public and designed to draw me out on his terms." "Hogwarts," Sirius said. Harry looked at him. "It's where he wants to finish it," Sirius said. "He tried for it as a teacher and was rejected. He tried for it as a ghost and was repelled. It represents everything he couldn't have: legitimacy, belonging, the part of magic that's about wonder rather than domination. He'll go for Hogwarts because he wants what it means as much as he wants the tactical advantage." The gray eyes that had been to the veil and back were steady. "He'll force the timeline. He'll attack Hogwarts to make you come to him. Then we need to be done with Gringotts before he does," Harry said. 2 days, Sirius said. "Maybe 3. 2, Harry said. "We plan tomorrow, we go the day after." Sirius nodded. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said something that wasn't about tactics at all. "James would have gone to Gringotts at the planning stage," he said. "You know that. He'd have walked in the front door and told the goblins exactly what he was there for on the theory that audacity was its own form of permission." Harry smiled. "Did it work for him?" "Approximately 60% of the time," Sirius said. "The other 40% was how he became such good friends with the hospital wing staff." He looked at Harry with the easy warmth of someone who has stopped rationing his good feelings. "You're better than him at the planning part. You think more steps ahead. But you've got his audacity in full and then some." "Is that a compliment?" Harry said. "It's a fact," Sirius said. "The compliment is that I think you're going to pull this off." Hermione found Harry in the back garden of the farmhouse at midnight, sitting on the ground with his palms flat on the cold grass and his eyes closed, which she had learned by now was not meditation or rest but the specific working concentration of someone navigating the Vale's geography. She sat beside him and waited. After 5 minutes he opened his eyes. "Third tier," he said. "Vault 317. The cup is in a stone alcove on the east wall, inside a locked chest with a blood identification ward." Hermione opened her notebook. "Wrote it down. Blood identification," she said. "That means it keys to Bellatrix. Aura Lestrange. We need either her or her blood. Or something that mimics it convincingly enough that the ward accepts it," Harry said. "Polyjuice," Hermione said immediately, in the tone of someone for whom Polyjuice was apparently a standard-issue tool. "If we can get a sample, even a hair from one of the Death Eaters who came today, can you get a hair from a Death Eater who was in the drawing room a few hours ago and disapparated before anyone could stop them?" Harry asked, genuinely curious. Hermione held up a small sealed vial. Inside it was what appeared to be a single dark hair. Harry stared at her. "From the collar of the overturned settee," she said. "When I was putting it upright. I collected it on principle." She examined the vial. "I'm fairly certain it's Bellatrix's. The length is consistent and the settee was directly in her path of entry." "You collected a hair from a Death Eater's battle site," Harry said, "on principle." "I collected what might be a polyjuice ingredient because we were raiding a heavily warded magical vault in the near future and I had no idea when an opportunity like that would come around again," Hermione said precisely. "Hermione," Harry said. "Yes. You're extraordinary." She looked away, which was as close as Hermione usually got to visible satisfaction at a compliment from Harry. "We need a month for polyjuice," she said, back to business. "We don't have a month." "What do we have?" "An accelerated brewing process that Slughorn mentioned twice in 6th year and that exists in a documented form in a restricted text in the Hogwarts library," she said. "Which produces a less stable version with a shorter transformation window but is achievable in approximately 48 hours if I start tonight." "Can you start tonight?" She was already standing up. "Why do you think I came out here?" she said. "I need the list of ingredients I'll have to source in the morning." Harry reeled off 7 ingredients from memory. The veil's knowledge touched the edges of magical chemistry the same way it touched most things, with the intuitive sense of what belonged and what didn't. Hermione wrote them down without blinking. "Sleep after this," she said. "I will," he said. She looked at him in the dark with the particular quality she had lately, the one she hadn't fully named and wasn't going to name yet, the careful fierce attention of someone who had watched a person change into something she didn't have a category for and had chosen, very deliberately, to be present for all of it. "You scared me today," she said. "Not the fight. Before the fight, deciding to let them find you, letting them watch. The deliberateness of it. It needed to happen," he said. "I know it did," she said. "I said it scared me. I didn't say it was wrong." He looked at her. "I know what I'm doing," he said, which was not reassurance. He didn't offer her false reassurance and she didn't want it. It was a statement of fact. "I know you do," she said. "That's what's frightening, actually. That you genuinely do." She held the notebook to her chest. 2 days to Gringotts. 2 days, he agreed. She went inside. Harry stayed in the garden a moment longer, feeling the cool air and the dark and the patient presence of the veil at the edge of everything. Somewhere northeast, Voldemort was directing the fear into a plan. Harry could feel the shape of it forming, the architecture of intent in someone who had spent decades building elaborate structures to avoid the one thing Harry now carried in him. He thought about the snake, warm and alive and twined close to its master. He thought about Hogwarts. He thought about the cup in Vault 317 and Hermione already inside at the kitchen table with her ingredients list and her accelerated brewing notes and a hair from Bellatrix Lestrange's collar, and Ron asleep upstairs and Sirius reading by the drawing room fire and Moody somewhere in the dark farmland perimeter doing what Moody did, and Dumbledore alone in his office at Hogwarts with a blackened hand and 8 months of borrowed time. He thought about all of it and felt no fear, just the clean mapped clarity of a path he could see end to end. He went inside. The next morning brought a letter. It arrived by Falcon, which was unusual, and landed on the kitchen windowsill with the deliberate placement of something that had been trained to deliver to a precise location rather than merely a general address. The letter was sealed with no symbol, no family crest, just a clean wax seal in dark gray. Harry opened it. The handwriting inside was precise and economical, the handwriting of a scientist rather than a politician. "Mr. Potter. I understand you have been busy. So have we. There are things about the veil that you need to know that I cannot tell you by letter. There are things about what you have become that I have been theorizing for decades, waiting for the evidence. I am at the location on the enclosed card. I will be there until Friday. After Friday, circumstances will make this conversation significantly more complicated. I suggest Thursday. N. Arden. The enclosed card had an address in Edinburgh. Harry set the letter on the table. Looked at it. Thought about Friday and what circumstances might mean in the context of a senior unspeakable who had been watching the Vale for 40 years. Who's it from? Ron said, appearing with 2 mugs of tea and handing one to Harry without looking. The unspeakable, Harry said. The one from the other night. Nadia Arden. She wants to meet Thursday. He picked up the card. Edinburgh. He could be there in under a second, the Vale's navigational sense making apparition feel like an extension of walking rather than a feat of concentration. She says after Friday things get complicated. Complicated how? Ron asked. That's what I'm trying to work out, Harry said. He felt through the Vale's awareness toward whatever Friday meant, not a specific event he could identify, but a pressure, a convergence. Something moving toward a fixed point. Several things, actually. Multiple forces approaching the same moment from different directions. Voldemort's timeline, he said quietly. He's moving Friday. Ron said. Something's moving Friday, Harry said. Or something's being set in motion. I can't tell yet whether it's him directly or something he's put in place. He thought about Hogwarts. About what Sirius had said. About the specific quality of a very frightened man forcing a timeline because the alternative was waiting while his foundations were removed one by one. Tell Hermione we'll do Gringotts on Thursday morning, he said. Before Edinburgh. We should be done by noon. She's going to point out that doing a Gringotts raid and meeting a senior government intelligence figure on the same day is excessive, Ron said. She's going to point it out and then she's going to agree, Harry said. Because she already knows the timeline. Ron considered this. Fair, he said, and went to wake Hermione. Harry looked at the letter from N. Arden and at the window beyond it where the morning was coming grey and clear over the Wiltshire countryside, and thought about Thursday, and thought about Friday, and thought about a man in a distant dark location arranging chess pieces in patterns that had stopped being about winning and started being about surviving. He folded the letter and put it in his pocket next to the one from the previous week. 2 days. Chapter 5. What Death Teaches Gringotts on a Thursday morning had the quality of a machine that had been running without interruption for 9 centuries and had developed opinions about being interfered with. Harry stood outside the white marble building on Diagon Alley at 8:30 with Hermione beside him and the polyjuice potion in a flask in his jacket pocket and the specific calm of someone who had thought this through from every angle and was satisfied with what the thinking had produced. The bronze doors were open. Goblins moved in and out with the purposeful neutrality of a species that dealt in gold and power and had long since stopped being impressed by either. The polyjuice is stable, Hermione said, in the quiet voice she used for operational information. 40-minute window. We need to be out of the vault in 30, maximum. We will be, Harry said. And if the blood ward on the chest doesn't accept it, then we move to the secondary option, Harry said. Hermione looked at him sideways. You haven't told me what the secondary option is. I know, he said. She breathed through her nose. Harry. If the polyjuice doesn't work, I'll handle the blood ward directly, he said. The ward keys to Lestrange blood because it's designed to recognize someone who shouldn't die before their time naturally. That's what blood wards on Gringotts vaults do, they read the biological signature of someone alive and healthy. The Vale can speak to those terms. Hermione was quiet for 3 seconds, which was her version of a long pause. You're going to convince a blood ward that you're Bellatrix Lestrange by being sufficiently authoritative about the nature of life and death. That's a reasonable summary, Harry said. You're going to argue with a ward. I'm going to present credentials it understands, he said. There's a difference. She looked at him for another moment and then said, right. Polyjuice first, ward negotiation as fallback. Yes. Fine. She uncapped the flask, drank half, and handed it to Harry with the expression of someone who had made peace with the fact that their life contained sentences like ward negotiation as fallback. The transformation was unpleasant in the way Polyjuice always was, the wrongness of becoming a different body, the brief internal argument between bone structure and magical intent before the magic one. When it resolved, Harry was looking at Hermione from 3 inches lower and through eyes that saw the world with a different quality, and Hermione was looking back at him from inside Bellatrix Lestrange's face with an expression of deep personal offense. "I hate this," she said, with Bellatrix's voice, which made it significantly more unsettling. 28 minutes, Harry said. They went in. The interior of Gringotts had the cathedral quality of old money, high ceilings, marble floors, the sound of quills and abacuses and the distant mechanical grinding of the vault railway somewhere below. The goblin at the nearest desk looked up at them and Harry watched the recognition move through its expression. Bellatrix Lestrange, presenting for vault access, nothing unusual. "Lestrange Vault," Harry said, using Bellatrix's voice with the flat arrogance she deployed the way other people used punctuation. "3rd tier." The goblin examined him. The examination was thorough and professional and involved several instruments that Harry wasn't entirely familiar with, and he stood still and let it happen with the appropriate impatient arrogance, which wasn't hard because the veil's quality of absolute assurance translated reasonably well into the specific register of someone who considered waiting beneath them. "Identification," the goblin said. Harry placed his right hand on the identification stone the goblin produced. The stone was warm and it read him. He felt it reading him, the magical sensitivity of the instrument pressing against the surface of Bellatrix's biological signature that the Polyjuice was maintaining, and beneath that pressing against the veil's presence, which was considerably older and more fundamental than goblin security protocols and which the stone seemed to take a moment to process. A very long moment. Harry held its gaze, its surface gaze, the instrument's mechanical examination, and let the veil's authority speak to whatever the stone was listening for. Not forging. Not falsifying. Simply presenting the truth that he was standing here, alive, with the right to access this vault, and letting the stone decide what to do with information that exceeded its usual categories. The stone went green. The goblin, if it noticed anything unusual about the duration of the reading, was professional enough not to say so. "Cart for the 3rd tier, Miss Lestrange," it said. "Griphook will escort." 23 minutes. The cart ride down was fast and disorienting, the tracks spiraling through layers of rock and wards and the ambient magic of 9 centuries of accumulated security. Griphook sat at the front with the professional blankness of a bank employee doing a job, and Harry sat in the back and felt the cup getting closer, the directional sense sharpening as the distance closed, the wrongness of it pulling like a thread being reeled in. The vault door was enormous and iron-banded and covered in the sigils of 3 separate warding systems. Griphook touched it with a small instrument that opened the outer locks, and then stepped back for the blood identification ward, which was a circle of runes set into the door that pulsed with a slow deep red light. Harry stepped forward and pressed his palm to it. The ward read him the same way the stone had, surface first, finding Bellatrix's signature in the Polyjuice, and then going deeper, finding the veil. This time the pause was longer. The runes cycled through red, amber, something close to white, and Harry felt the ward's intelligence, not consciousness exactly, but the functional equivalent, the accumulated magical intent of decades of security work, pressing against the quality of what it had found and trying to categorize it. He didn't argue. He just let the ward look, and let what it found be what it was, and waited. The door opened. Hermione exhaled behind him. Inside, the vault was exactly what wealth and paranoia produce when combined over generations, stacked with gold and artifacts and dark objects and the general accumulated detritus of a family that had been powerful and feared for centuries. Harry moved through it with the directional sense fixed on the east wall, finding the stone alcove immediately, finding the locked chest with the second blood ward exactly where he'd felt it from the farmhouse garden. He opened this one faster. Same process, same result, 20 seconds. The cup was inside. It was smaller than he'd expected, a golden goblet, 2-handled, the badger crest of Hufflepuff engraved on the side, ordinary looking in the way that very dangerous things often were. The Horcrux inside it was familiar now, recognizable, Voldemort's specific brand of soul fracture, the screaming quality, the desperate blind insistence on not being unmade. Harry picked it up. 15 minutes, Hermione said from behind him, voice tight. He closed his hand around the cup and let the veil's authority through, and the Horcrux came apart in 8 seconds, faster than the diadem, slower than the ring, the particular resistance of a Horcrux made by someone who had been getting better at the work meeting the particular authority of something that had been doing its work since before Voldemort was a thought. The cup went still. The screaming stopped. Harry set it down on the floor of the vault. Just a cup now. Just gold. He left it there. Hermione made a quiet sound. We should take it, for evidence, leave it, Harry said. I want him to find it. I want him to open this vault and find the cup sitting on the floor of his ally's vault with the Horcrux gone and no sign of how. He looked at the empty cup on the stone floor. Let him understand what that means. They made it back to the surface with 4 minutes on the Polyjuice window, transformed back to themselves in a side alley off Diagon while Hermione's hand was shaking slightly from adrenaline and Harry's was not, and walked out onto the main thoroughfare in the thin November sunshine like two people who had just done something extremely ordinary. Ron was at the leaky cauldron with 2 cups of tea and the expression of someone who has been sitting still for 40 minutes by pure force of will. Well, he said. Done, Harry said. Ron let out a long slow breath. Right, he said. Right. That's 5 then. The diary, the ring, the locket, the diadem, the cup. 5, Harry confirmed. The snake and then we're finished. Ron looked at the table. The snake's with you-know-who. Yes, Harry said. So finishing means, it means what it's always meant, Harry said. It just means it's sooner than expected. Ron was quiet for a moment. Then he picked up his tea. Edinburgh next. Edinburgh next, Harry said. Nadia Arden's address in Edinburgh was a Georgian townhouse on a quiet street behind the university, the kind of building that had been old when the university was founded and intended to remain old when it was gone. The door was answered before Harry could knock by Corvin Mace, who looked at him with the expression of a man who had been expecting him and was still doing the calculation of what he represented. She's ready, Mace said. The room Arden worked in was everything her letter had suggested she would be, books stacked in the specific way of someone who actually reads rather than displays, instruments of magical measurement on every available surface, maps on the walls with notations in a handwriting that matched the letter. And at the center of it all a woman of perhaps 70 with white hair cut short and eyes that were the particular shade of pale gray that sometimes goes with very high intelligence and very little patience for performance. She looked at Harry the way Harry imagined the entity behind the veil might look at something if it had eyes, not with warmth or menace but with the absolute focused attention of something that has been waiting for a very specific thing to arrive and is now conducting the confirmation that it has. Sit, she said. Not rudely. Just efficiently. Harry sat. Hermione sat beside him, which Arden acknowledged with a nod that communicated respect for the notebook already open on her knee. Mace took a position by the door. You went through the veil, Arden said. We seem to be starting all conversations this way lately, Harry said. Because it's the relevant fact, she said. Everything else is context. She folded her hands on the desk. I've been studying the veil for 41 years. My predecessor studied it for 30 before me. Before her, a man named Aldrich Voss studied it for 52 years and produced 12 volumes of findings that were classified at the highest ministry level and that I spent the first decade of my career simply reading and arguing with. A pause. In 120 years of combined study, we produced one coherent theory about what the veil fundamentally is. And that theory required a veil walker to be confirmed. Someone who had passed through and returned with the entity's authority. What's the theory? Harry said. That the veil is not a magical construct, Arden said. Not created by wizards or any known magical species. That it predates human magic by an order of magnitude that makes ancient an inadequate word. That the entity behind it is not a god in the theological sense but a fundamental force. One of perhaps a dozen forces that underpin the structure of existence, the way gravity underpins the structure of matter. She looked at him steadily. And that the force in question designated stewards. Periodically. When the boundary between life and death was being abused. Harry was very still. The last steward, Arden continued, appears in our records approximately 600 years ago. A wizard in what is now Hungary who could not be killed by any magical means and who reportedly destroyed 3 dark artifacts that predated the Veil's current location. He appears in the historical record for about 15 years and then, nothing. No death recorded. No further sightings. He simply ceased to be documented. What happened to him? Hermione asked, leaning forward. We don't know, Arden said. Which is the thing I need to tell you. She looked at Harry directly. The stewardship is not permanent. The entity doesn't retire its stewards. They cease being stewards when the condition that required a steward is resolved. Harry held her gaze. You mean when Voldemort is dead? When the abuse of the death boundary is resolved, Arden said precisely. In your case, yes, Riddle and his Horcruxes represent the most significant deliberate violation of the life-death boundary in recorded history. 7 pieces of soul trapped on the wrong side of the Veil's natural process. The entity chose you specifically because the violation is specific, and because you, as the entity apparently told you, have been adjacent to its domain since infancy. She paused. Once the violation is resolved, the authority it has given you will diminish. Not disappear immediately. But over time, the specific power will recede. The room was quiet for a moment. I know, Harry said. Arden looked at him. You know. I felt it in the quality of what it gave me, Harry said. It's not a gift. It's a commission. A specific task with specific tools. When the task is done, the tools go back. He said it without distress, which seemed to be the thing that surprised Arden, the equanimity of it. I went through the Veil to save my godfather. I came back with something extraordinary. I'm going to use it to finish what Voldemort started and what has been aimed at me since before I could walk. And then I'll be Harry Potter. Which is fine. Arden studied him for a long moment. Most people, she said, when they encounter the possibility of power, find the idea of its removal distressing. Most people are afraid of death, Harry said. I spent a night in its domain and came back with its authority. The fear of losing the authority doesn't really fit in the same space as the understanding the authority came with. Hermione was writing something in her notebook very rapidly. Harry glanced at her. Continue, she said, without looking up. Arden almost smiled. There's something else, she said. The reason I said Friday makes things more complicated. She rose from behind the desk and went to the largest map on the wall, Britain, marked with dozens of notations in that precise handwriting, with threads connecting various points. She touched a cluster of marks in Scotland. For the past 2 weeks, we've been tracking unusual magical activity at Hogwarts and in the surrounding region. Not just the usual enchantment variants, something structural. Something that reads like preparation. Voldemort's people, Harry said. We believe so, Arden said. And the volume of activity is consistent with a large-scale assault rather than an infiltration. Our instruments suggest something is being assembled, we don't know what exactly, but the magical signature has the quality of very old, very dark magic being channeled toward a specific location. She turned from the map. We think he'll move on Hogwarts before the weekend. Friday, Harry said. Tomorrow night, most likely, Arden said. Saturday at the absolute latest. She looked at him. I'm telling you this because the Ministry is not prepared. Fudge's office has been refusing our threat assessments for months, and the Aura department is undermanned and poorly positioned. The only people who are prepared are the Order, Harry said. And me. And you, she confirmed. Whatever that means tactically. Harry stood up. The map on the wall, the threads connecting points in Scotland, the cluster of marks around Hogwarts. He looked at it and felt the shape of Friday in the Veil's awareness, multiple forces converging, the timeline Voldemort had been forcing since Tuesday clicking into its final configuration. "Can you tell McGonagall?" he asked. "Formally, through official channels. Not because she doesn't know, she'll have her own intelligence by now, but because having the unspeakables formally alert the school gives her grounds to mobilize that the Ministry can't block." "Already in progress," Arden said. "The communication went out this morning." "Good," Harry said. He looked at the map one more moment. Hogwarts, circled in red notation, threads pulling toward it from the southeast. "Thank you," he said to Arden. "For being honest. And for being quick about it." "I've been waiting 40 years for this conversation," she said. "I wasn't going to waste it on ceremony." She paused. "One more thing." She went to her desk and produced a slim volume, old, the binding worn to bare board. "Voss' 13th volume," she said. "The classified one. The one he never finished. It's about what stewards can do that hasn't been documented anywhere else." She held it out. "I imagine you've been discovering it empirically, but it's useful to have the theory." Harry took the book. The cover said nothing, no title, just the wear of age. "Voss finished it," he said, turning it over. "He just didn't, he couldn't finish documenting because he was called away before he was done." Arden looked at him very carefully. "How do you know that?" "The book knows," Harry said simply, and that was as close as he could come to explaining it. The Veil's sense finding the history of objects the way it found the history of everything, the residue of intent and use that attached to things that had mattered to people. The last 20 pages were dictated rather than written. He was in a hurry. Arden sat back down in her chair with the careful movement of someone who has just confirmed something enormous. "Read it tonight," she said. "I will," Harry said. They were back in the farmhouse by 4 in the afternoon. Harry called everyone to the drawing room, the Order members stationed there, Sirius, Ron, Hermione, and laid it out without preamble: Hogwarts, Friday night, everything Voldemort had. The room received this with the quality of people who had been expecting it and were still required to adjust to it being real. Moody spoke first. "Defensive deployment," he said. "I can have the Order positioned at every entry point by tomorrow noon. The students need to be moved to the lower floors, the dungeons will hold if the upper castle is breached." "The students aren't being evacuated," Harry said. Everyone looked at him. "The older ones aren't," he clarified. 6th and 7th years stay if they choose to. Some of them have been training with Dumbledore's army for a year and a half. They know more practical defensive magic than half the adults in this room." He paused. "I'm not telling them to fight. I'm not drafting anyone. But they get the choice, and I'm not making it for them by evacuating them without asking." "Harry," Lupin started. "Remus," Harry said, and the name with the quality he put into it stopped the automatic protective instinct in its tracks. "I was fighting basilisks and dementors at 12. You know what those students are capable of. Let them choose." Lupin was quiet. "Then, McGonagall will support that," he said. "If anyone argues it, she'll argue it for you." "She'll argue it before I ask," Harry said, which was true. "What about Dumbledore?" Sirius asked. "He'll be there," Harry said. "But not leading. He paused, choosing words that were honest without being brutal in front of the room. "He's not well. He'll fight if it comes to it, but the strategy comes from us." Moody nodded, the sharp decisive nod of a man who had fought alongside Dumbledore and loved him and could also assess his current capabilities with professional honesty. "Right. Positioning. They planned for 2 hours. Real planning, the kind with maps and contingencies and argued alternatives, Moody knowing more about defensive magical architecture than anyone else in the room, Hermione contributing tactical theory from sources she'd clearly been reading in anticipation of this, Sirius knowing Hogwarts in the specific way of someone who had spent 4 years learning exactly which rules existed in order to find the exceptions to them. Harry listened to most of it and contributed specific tactical points and deferred on everything that wasn't his specific domain, which was easy because Moody was genuinely better at conventional battle tactics than he was, and Harry had never had trouble acknowledging that someone knew more than him about their own field. What Harry knew, what he contributed in the spaces between the conventional planning, was the quality of what tomorrow would actually be. Where Voldemort would position himself, what he'd send first, what he was afraid of in ways that would affect his tactical choices. The Veil's sense of Voldemort's fear was a direct tactical intelligence asset, and Harry used it as plainly as Moody used 40 years of Auror experience. By 6 o'clock they had a plan that was good. Not perfect. Nothing was ever perfect when the variables included a Dark Lord and approximately 400 students and a castle with 700 years of idiosyncratic magical modifications. But good, adaptive, with multiple contingencies, with clear lines of communication and decision-making authority and explicit instructions for what to do if any given element failed. Harry read Voss's 13th volume after dinner. It was extraordinary and unsurprising in equal measure. Extraordinary because some of what Voss documented was capabilities Harry hadn't discovered yet, and unsurprising because all of it fit the logic of what he already understood. The Veil Walker, Voss had written in his careful precise hand, is not precisely a weapon or a defender. The most accurate description is a resolution, a force inserted into an imbalance to correct it. The entity does not grant power in the sense of adding something foreign to the steward. It reveals and amplifies what was already there. Harry read that sentence twice. What was already there? The ability to survive a killing curse at 15 months old. The Parseltongue, which he now understood had not been Voldemort's, or not entirely. The connection to death that had made him instinctively understand the Thestrals, the Mirror of Eriste, the Veil's whispers. These things had been his all along. The entity had simply shown him that and removed the fear that had been sitting on top of them. The last 20 pages were indeed dictated, the handwriting different, shakier, faster, the punctuation inconsistent, someone in a hurry. Voss's final entries described a confrontation in detail he'd clearly been too pressed to edit, and what came through was not the record of a battle but the record of a reckoning, a man who had the Veil's authority walking into the presence of the thing he'd been tasked to resolve and simply ending it. Not with drama. Not with a duel of spells. With the authority of the thing he carried, which had made him the local representative of something older than magic, and which Dark Lords and dark artifacts alike were fundamentally not equipped to argue with. Harry closed the book at 10 o'clock. Sirius was in the doorway. Ready for tomorrow? Yes, Harry said. Nervous? Harry thought about it honestly. No, he said. Focused. Sirius nodded. He came into the room and sat in the chair across from Harry, and they sat in companionable silence for a moment, the fire low, the farmhouse quiet around them. I've been thinking about after, Sirius said. After it's done. What comes next? What have you been thinking? Harry said. I'd like to take you somewhere, Sirius said. Not immediately. When things have settled. There's a place in Scotland, north of Inverness, where your father and I spent 2 weeks in the summer of '78. Just a cottage on a loch, nothing remarkable about it except that we were there and we were young and we had no particular obligations. He paused. I'd like to go back. With you, if you'd come. Harry looked at him. The Sirius in the room versus the Sirius of 6 months ago, the stillness, the completeness of being present in the moment. The man who had been to the Veil's domain and chosen life with full knowledge of what it meant and what it cost. Yes, Harry said. I'd like that. Sirius smiled. Good, he said. Something to plan for. They came to Hogwarts at dusk on Friday. Harry felt them before the wards announced it, a gathering mass of intent, dark and heavy and coming from the south and east simultaneously, the specific signature of a large coordinated magical force moving with purpose. He was at the edge of the forbidden forest with the veil's sense oriented outward like a compass, and what he felt was the full weight of Voldemort's deployment, not restrained, not testing, everything. The doors of Hogwarts were at his back. The lights of the castle came through the windows in warm yellow rectangles against the November dark, and inside those lights were Order members in position and McGonagall walking corridors with the flat professional calm of a woman who had been at this school through multiple crises and intended to be here for several more, and the selected 6th and 7th years who had chosen to stay at the count of 112, which was more than anyone had expected and exactly what Harry had predicted. Ron was to his left. Hermione to his right. Sirius was somewhere on the east perimeter with Moody. Lupin had the north approach with 4 Order members. The castle itself had been woken by McGonagall in the way Hogwarts could be woken by someone who knew how, the suits of armor ambulatory, the staircases reconfigured, the castle's own considerable protective magic channeled and directed. "Here they come," Ron said quietly. They came over the ridge south of Hogwarts in a dark mass that resolved as it moved into individual figures, dozens of them, not the few Harry had been seeing in small deployments. 40, maybe 50 Death Eaters, moving in the coordinated formation of a military force that had been drilling this specific approach. In front, Bellatrix, her dark robes billowing in the cold wind, her wand already raised. Behind her, the collected power of everything Voldemort had available. And behind all of them, moving at a distance, a figure that Harry felt before he saw, the cold signature of the entities opposite, the specific quality of a soul that had been torn and reassembled and torn again into something that had lost its original architecture. Voldemort, on the ridge, watching. Not leading. Watching. Harry turned his attention to Bellatrix and the force advancing toward the castle and thought clearly about what the plan was, which was not defensive. "Hermione," he said. "Ready," she said. "Ron." "Ready," Ron said, with the voice of someone who is genuinely afraid and has decided that doesn't matter. "Stay back from me," Harry said. "Both of you. Whatever happens in the next 10 minutes, stay back." He walked forward. The Death Eater's advance faltered, not stopped, but hesitated, the way a wave hesitates at the sight of a rock it didn't expect. Bellatrix raised her wand and fired without preamble, the same combination she tried at Grimmauld Place, fast and varied and utterly certain. Harry walked through it. Not around. Through. The curses met him and came apart, the red and green and violet light dissolving into the air, and he kept walking, and the distance between him and 40 Death Eaters closed steadily, and the faltering in their advance became visible at 30 feet and complete at 20 feet. Bellatrix's face, by 20 feet, had moved through 3 expressions and arrived at something that wasn't fear in any form Harry had seen from her before. "Mors Mordre," she said, and the dark mark blazed above the field in sickly green light, a signal, a call for reinforcement or instruction. "That won't help," Harry said. He stopped walking at 10 feet from the front line of Death Eaters. 40 people with wands raised, the best that Voldemort had, and Harry stood in the dark November field in front of Hogwarts and felt the veil's authority sitting in him like bedrock. "Here's what's going to happen," he said, and the quality of his voice in the field was not loud but carried with the clarity of something that didn't need volume to reach everywhere it needed to reach. "Most of you are going to leave. Now. You're going to turn around and walk away, and what happens after this is over is going to go significantly better for you than what happens if you stay." He looked across the line of them. "A few of you won't. The ones who don't, I'm going to deal with directly." Bellatrix laughed, and it was the wrong laugh, slightly too high, missing the full conviction it usually had. "Potter," she said. "You're one." Harry looked at her. She stopped. "Try again," he said. She threw everything at him simultaneously, every curse she had, firing with both hands, calling to the Death Eaters on either side to fire as well, and for 5 or 6 seconds the air between them was thick with magic, a concentrated barrage of everything the most dangerous dark witch in Britain could produce, and Harry stood in it and let the veil's authority speak to every piece of it, and pieces of it came apart, and pieces came apart, and pieces came apart until Bellatrix Lestrange Stood with her wand raised and nothing happening and her chest heaving with the effort of not understanding. 12 Death Eaters broke. Turned. Operat from the field with the sharp cracks of people making fast decisions in their own interest. Harry watched them go. The ones who stayed, 28 of them, had the look of people who had committed to a course of action and were going to see it through because the alternatives were worse to them than the risk. Loyalty, some of them. Fear of Voldemort, more of them. Ideology, a few. Harry reached into the fabric of the field and opened tiers. Small ones. Not the full veil, not the doorway the entity had shown him was possible, the full terrible magnificent opening of Death's gateway. Just small tiers in the boundary, spots in the night air where the veil's domain touched the living world, visible as a barely perceptible thinning of reality, a shimmer that was the visual equivalent of hearing something just below the threshold of hearing. 3 of the Death Eaters nearest him felt it before they could see it. He watched their bodies respond before their minds could, the ancient animal recognition of proximity to death's boundary, not the metaphorical proximity of battle but the actual nearness of the thing itself, the raw instinctive alarm that lived below thought. All 3 of them left. What remained was 25, and Bellatrix, and the distant figure on the ridge that had not moved. Bellatrix, Harry said. He was close enough now that he didn't have to raise his voice. What did Voldemort offer you? She looked at him with those wide eyes, and the complexity of what was in them was, in its way, one of the saddest things Harry had seen, not because he pitied her, not simply, but because the totality of Bellatrix Lestrange, her brilliance and her capacity and her absolute annihilating loyalty, had been poured entirely into one vessel and the vessel had made her into this. Everything, she said. He offered everything. He can't deliver it, Harry said. He's been running from death for 20 years and death is standing in front of you. Whatever he promised you is built on the foundation of something that's already gone. 5 of his Horcruxes are destroyed, Harry said. The cup went this morning. He has one left and he knows it, and the one thing in the world that scares Voldemort is standing in this field with you and it's not going away. The silence on the field was the silence of a moment at an edge. Go home, Bellatrix, Harry said. And there was something in the saying of it, not dismissal, not contempt, not the performance of mercy that feels like condescension. Something real and direct, the thing the veil had given him of looking at a person and seeing the full architecture of them, their history and their choices and the pieces of them that had been broken at the foundations, and addressing what was actually there. Bellatrix Lestrange looked at Harry Potter for a long moment. Then she looked at the ridge where Voldemort stood. Then she looked back. And something moved through her face that Harry had no name for, complex and real and over in a second, and then she operat, and the crack of her departure was the signal the remaining Death Eaters needed, and they went in a rapid sequence of cracks that echoed across the dark November field like something being dismantled piece by piece. Then the field was quiet. Ron appeared at Harry's shoulder. They're all gone, he said. Not all of them, Harry said. He was looking at the ridge. Voldemort had not moved during any of it. He stood at the top of the rise in the dark with the snake coiled at his feet and the cold signature of his fear become anger radiating across the distance like a frequency. He was looking at Harry with the specific quality of a man who has just watched everything he assembled dissolve and who is currently deciding what this means about the fundamental nature of things. Harry raised his wand. Old instinct. Then he lowered it. He didn't need it for what came next. He held Voldemort's gaze across the dark field and felt the veil's awareness between them, the distance, the cold air, the enormous weight of everything this moment had been built toward since the night in Godric's Hollow 27 years ago, and said, to the distance, knowing it would carry, I know where Nagini is, he said. I know where you are. I know what you have left. We'll finish this on my terms. A pause. Godric's Hollow, Harry said. 1 week. Come alone, or don't come, I'll find you either way. And Voldemort, who had not run from anything in 30 years, who had faced Dumbledore in the Ministry atrium with the cold composure of someone who considered himself untouchable, Voldemort looked at Harry across the dark field and felt, for the first time in the long careful history of his terrible choices, the thing he had spent his entire life building his entire architecture to never feel. He turned and walked away. The castle behind Harry exhaled, warm light pouring from every window, and the cheers that erupted from somewhere inside it were ragged and disbelieving and completely, entirely real. Ron made a sound beside him that was mostly just sound, some expression of relief and amazement that didn't fit neatly into words. Hermione appeared on his other side and her hand found his arm and held it with the grip of someone who needs to confirm solidity. He ran, Ron said. He ran, Harry confirmed. Voldemort, Ron said. Ran. From you. On a Thursday. Friday, Hermione said automatically. Whatever day it is, Ron said, I am absolutely going to be telling this story for the rest of my life. Harry looked at the empty ridge. At the dark field. At the castle above him with its warm windows and its cheering and its 700 years of being the place where magic lived. 1 week. The veil was patient at the edge of everything, as it always was, as it always would be, and Harry stood in the cold and the dark and the aftermath and felt the commission in him like a compass pointing toward the last fixed point, Godric's Hollow, where it had started, where it would end. He turned and walked back toward the castle.